Okay. Good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to here at the council room here in UCC on a glorious May morning, and I'm really, really delighted to open up today's proceedings because this really is the fruit of a lot of things that are happening at the moment in Dante studies here in UCC, but also in dialogue with our great friends in the Department of Early and Medieval Irish. And today, the hope for today is that there is a kind of a genuine dialogue between the two things. It's not a conference per se, but rather it really is. It is about kind of opening up what we hope to be a fruitful exchange. Sorry, I should introduce myself to those who don't know me. My name is Darrell O'Connell. I'm the director of the Dante, the Centre for Dante Studies here in Ireland. And for the last number of years, we've been engaging in a lot of outreach programs, public lecture series, as many of you know, but also we have managed to group together here in UCC over the last number of years a huge number of postdocs working on Dante-related projects and a great cohort of PhD students, and all of them, thankfully, wonderfully funded by our good friends at the Irish Research Council, and a big shout out to them. And really, the Irish Research Council allows us then to kind of develop small projects. And it just so happens that on this particular occasion, we've had the coming together of two, I think, very important things. We have a third-year PhD student, Eszter Caponetti, who is literally working on Dante and the Irish vision literature. And we also have Eszter, Dr. Eszter who has come to us on a postdoc from Cambridge, where she did a wonderful PhD on Dream in Dante. And through their dialogue in our department, they came up with organizing today's events. Now, as you know, this is not a Dante conference. So for those of you who have had enough of listening to us go on about Dante, the problem is really that Dante is, if you like, the poster boy for the afterlife. And there is, I suppose, a strand within Dante studies, and I should point out that Dante studies is this kind of huge subset within Italian studies. And there is, I suppose, there is a strand within Dante studies which dismisses this type of literary artifact, this type of tradition. Reducing it to the popular, reducing it to something that is not of any great interest to Dante, because obviously Dante is he's Virgil, he's part of this huge canon, and was immediately canonized on the point of his death, if you like. And this is a wonderful exegetical commentary tradition that comes out after him. But that's not quite true. And I think one of the fruitful areas in Dante studies is the fact that over the last number of years, there's been some real concerted effort to look at Dante's intellectual formation, the religious schools and Santa Maria Novella and Santa Croce in Florence, because Florence at the time wouldn't have had a university. He did spend some time, obviously, in Bologna, which did, trying to figure out what kind of formation, intellectual and otherwise, Dante had. And then there has been, over the last number of years, more research projects looking with a kind of concerted effort at different types of literature or vernacularizations of Latin texts that would have come in to Florence in the Florence of his youth. And one of these is really, one of these strands is vision literature. Some people call it popular literature, the popular literature that he would have embraced, or at least be subject to, whether you've heard it or read it. These are questions that we are not here to answer. But we know that these texts were in circulation, and they had been for a very long time. And I know I'm talking to people who know far more about these texts than I do. So we thought it would be nice to kind of, rather than organize a kind of a one-day study session on Dante and vision literature, that we would enter into dialogue with people from different disciplinary backgrounds, from their own different formations. And I think this is perhaps, and this is part of the real value of what we're here to do today, and I want to really signal this because I think it's the most important aspect of it, that today giving papers are people from across the full range of career stages. We have people here at PhD stage, postdoctoral stage, people mid-career, and also senior academics. And I think this is a really important thing, that we have value in dialogue. So we want, as much as possible, to listen to very interesting papers, and judging from the titles, they are really, really excellent. But also that there be a kind of a fruitful exchange across the generations, across the career stages, because this is really a learning experience for everybody. So before we begin the first session, I'm going to ask Eszter, as one of the co-organizers of today's event, to say just a few words. Eszter? Including our sponsors, obviously.
Yes, of course.
I forgot.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And it's a great pleasure to have you here in Cork. So my name is Eszter. I was in touch with most of you in correspondence before, but it's really nice to see everyone in person here. So I'm not going to say very much because I think we're sort of running out of time for this introduction anyway. I'm just going to thank our sponsors. So the UCC Department of Italian, CESLAC, or the Center for Advanced Studies in Languages and Cultures, also at UCC. Also the Society for Italian Studies, that has also sponsored us very generously. As Dara has pointed out, it's really the perfect moment and the perfect place to be doing this kind of work because of the strengths we have here at UCC, which is precisely the Dante studies and the early and medieval Irish that have worked very productively before on specific topics in the project De Finibus, which I know many of you have worked on as well. So it's really great to have this sense of continuation and development in a productive direction. So our idea for the rest of the day was precisely the belief that Ireland played a not insignificant role in comedies which might be landscape. And even if it's not, as I has pointed out, not necessarily always the case of any kind of direct or demonstrable influence, we're still interested in all kinds of visionary precursors for that as comedy. So many of the texts we're going to be talking about today, Vision of Rusei, or Navigatio Sancti Berendani, or Vision of Adam Man, or Tractatus de Purgatoria Sancti Patrizi, or Visione Nugdali. And I think it's really important to be claiming Dante in this context of this so-called popular literature, visionary tradition before Dante, not simply read Dante as someone like Curtius does, as standing with learned traditional Middle Ages, but also very much getting inspired by this more popular tradition of visions. And also to be thinking about Dante, I think it's also a crucial moment to be thinking about Dante in relation to this wider European context, and just Dante as an Italian and in Italy, but also someone working with the broader visionary tradition, vision and quest literature tradition that's resonating across Europe. So really, what we want to do here today is to be bringing these traditions in dialogue via Dante as a kind of figure that allows us to think about both of the traditions as we try to appreciate the distinctiveness, but also recognize some of the commonalities they might be having in answering some of the questions which I think are crucial and central to the medieval and also possibly our modern understanding of the self. So primarily how one can be present to other realities and those that are immediately visible to our senses, and how readers partake, how they invite us, how texts invite us as readers to partake in those extraordinary visionary experiences, and also how our understanding of miraculous and supernatural is shaped by genre expectations, but also all kinds of social, cultural, philosophical, and theological contexts. So I'm not going to speak for any longer. I think we should just jump into papers straight away. And Dara will be moderating the first session.
I'll just introduce the
speakers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Eszter. And thank you for mentioning our sponsors. Very important that they get a shout out as well. So we got a packed program that if you don't have a program, they're actually on the table there. For those of you in the room, for those of you online, well, you can look from online. We have 3 speakers in the first session, followed by a discussion. And our first speaker is the one I think has come the furthest. And I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Eszter Draskoczy. She's a junior researcher at the Institute for Literary Studies of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. She completed her PhD in Hungary and also in collaboration with the University of Bologna. Her PhD thesis examined transformations Ovidian allusions and antithetical structures in Dante's comedy. And her monograph, which I will not pronounce in the Hungarian language, if you don't mind, but it's a thing of beauty, I'm told. To give it its English title is Descents to the Underworld and Punishments in Hell, Ancient and Medieval Literary Sources in Dante's Divine Comedy, and that was published in 2022. And when I met her in Ravenna, when we were over there last year, she gave me a copy of this wonderful volume, and that is Quelle terre che il Danubio riga, Dante in Ungaria, so Dante in Hungary. So she's a very prolific researcher, and we are genuinely delighted to have her here. The title of Eszter's paper is The Contrapasso, for the non-Dantisti in the room. This is Dante's system of punishment. The Contrapasso in visionary text, the Irish tradition, and the Comic. Eszter, a te la parola. So maybe you just help us set up the
Yes.
our,
Please, Astina.
to share screen.
Yeah. Good morning. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the organizers and sponsors for their generous invitation to this lovely event. The Irish visions, I refer to those related to Ireland, yet written in Latin, bear the imprint of Celtic Irish folklore, beliefs, and mythology, which, converging with Christian thoughts and apocalyptic texts, created a rich imagery of the afterlife. Missionaries who left their homeland to spread the Christian message on pagan populations influenced the birth of the vision as a genre in the regions of continental Europe. Some of the visions, such as the Visio Crusade, St. Patrick's Purgatory, and the Visio Tundeli, as well as Irish travel narratives with otherworldly tours, enjoyed considerable popularity and spread throughout Europe. They have come down to us in hundreds of Latin manuscripts and have been translated into various languages. It is likely that they were known to Dante as well. The Irish visions, exemplifying all existing typologies of the genre, form a unique branch within the visionary tradition. Being more related to the country's geography and religious cults, they feature local historical and religious characters who act as aids to the hero in the otherworldly experience. Moreover, the physicality of the protagonists is given greater prominence than in different branches of the tradition. Let's have a look at two of these typologies of the genre by mentioning Irish Latin examples. The first one is related to the question of the distinction between vision and travel narrative. While in Cesare and Segre's view, there are clear differences between vision and travel, we find two sets with a remarkable overlap. According to Peter Dinzelbacher's definition, vision is an experience in which someone is supernaturally transported from their natural environment into another space. In my view, there are two distinct phases which together form the vision narrative, and which are present in varying degrees in the various texts. One, seeing, receiving, and understanding the revelation. Two, the path and journey leading to that moment. In my opinion, we can distinguish three types from this perspective. One, revelation that do not narrate a journey. Both in the biblical apocalyptic and in the hagiographic tradition, a revelation can appear directly to the person to whom it is addressed. Although dreams and visions in which the other world appears may often contain the element of displacement, the framework of the journey is not present in the story. The revelations are important sources for the genre of vision, but I think they form a complementary genre. The narratives of journeys with a detour to the other world in the Western literary tradition have their origin in the ancient Greek and Roman epic. From the 7th century onwards, the narrative of the journey became an inseparable part of the vision of the other world, representing, on the on one hand, an itinerary, a kind of guide to the other world, the guide to the places visited, and on the other hand, the spiritual journey of the protagonist, a tale of initiation and purification. Based on the story of the journey, a map and sometimes a cosmogony is sketched. This category is represented by the navigation of St. Brendan. 3. The most popular type of the medieval visions is the account of an eschatological revelation embedded within an otherworldly journey, which means the journey of the soul, while the body lays unconscious, seeming dead, like in the case of the Knight Tundalus. The other typology, sorry. The other typology I wish to shed light on concerns the types of heroes or protagonists of the vision. The main categories of heroes are as follows. 1. The protagonist of a vision can be a chosen one, someone who, because of their merits, has been deemed worthy to God to see the afterlife while still alive, to receive a cosmic and a political eschatological revelation, and to become the prophet of these truths hidden from the living. This is the biblical apocalyptic model that applies to monk Fursa, who receives his visions in the first half of the 7th century. The chosen one is assigned a precise task. What he sees and comes to know is to be the subject of his preaching, and not kept silent, as by St. Paul in the canonized version, and obviously provides a model for Dante in the Commedia. 2. Alternatively, the vision may be that of a seemingly deceased person, whose vision is a divine admonition to change customs. This is the most frequent setting of medieval visions, in which the protagonist falls ill or is the victim of an accident. While the body lies unconscious for a few days, the protagonist's soul is accompanied to the afterlife by an angel or a saint. This occurs to the Knight Tundalus. 3. In contrast to the preceding examples, the seeker embarks on a journey to the other world of his own volition, either to find paradise or to atone for a sin. This category encompasses individuals driven by a passion for knowledge, who embark on their journeys with both physical and intellectual aspirations, aiming to reach the earthly paradise beyond the boundaries of the known world. Similarly, the abbot St. Brendan, in a way anticipating Dante's Ulysses, driven by a quest for the land promised to the saints, traversed the Atlantic Ocean between the islands of Hell and Paradise. While the tradition connected to the sacred site of St. Patrick's Purgatory provided penitent travelers with access to the underworld, an ample number of penitents undertook pilgrimages to the confined cavern, which was regarded as the terrestrial gateway to the afterlife. Accounts related to St. Patrick's Purgatory imply that anyone who wishes to observe the tortures of the soul after death and purify themselves of their sins through this kind of gateway has the explicit possibility of having an afterlife experience. The Pilgrim of the Commedia employs a number of models of this tradition. The other journey undertaken by Dante through Inferno and Purgatory is necessitated by his bewilderment, caused by individual sin, though it is only divine grace which makes it possible. He does not seek the otherworldly experience, the dangers of which all penitents in St. Patrick's Purgatory are warned at least twice. Instead, he is reassured by divine approval of his journey. Dante, following in the footsteps of Tundalus and Owain, crosses the regions of fear and penitence. Having been purified, of sinful dispositions, he is commissioned to bear witness to all that he sees, in pro del mondo. Subsequently, he is included among those who receive the vision of God and are elected for their religious merits, following an examination in heaven concerning faith, hope, and charity. Unlike the trials of the three beasts at the beginning of the comedy, these trials will be sustained. The Commedia deliberately distinguishes itself from previous otherworldly visions, both in terms of its high level of literary achievement and in its conception of a thoughtful moral system based on Aristotelian ethics and Thomist doctrine. Dante's term contrapasso is derived from the Latin contrapassus, which is used in the commentaries of Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas on the Nicomachean Ethics and in the Summa Theologiae. As a translation of the Greek term antipapontos, literally means what one suffers in return, and the term is taken from the Nicomachean Ethics. Dante thus derives the word contrapasso from a scholastic context, where this term is equivalent to the law of retribution. In this sense, and only once, does the word appear in the Commedia, as stated by Bertrand de Born. Perché io parti così giunte persone, partito porto il mio cerebro lasso. Così si osserva in me lo contrapasso. However, beyond the philosophical origin of the term itself, correlation between guilt and otherworldly punishment can be found in the visionary tradition as well. We can observe various types of correspondences between sins and punishments as early as in the proto-visions. The Apocalypse of Peter, dating from the mid-2nd century, one of the earliest Christian apocrypha, is the first text to describe in detail the individual torture that awaits every sinner after the resurrection, listing 23 types of punishments. 11 have a correspondence with the sin they punish. The correspondences between guilt and punishment, which seems to provide a fundamental model for Dante's system of punishment, can be categorized as follows. 1. Explicit correspondence between sin and punishment. When the sinner is punished together with an object pertaining to his sin, like idolaters are burnt together with the false idols they worship. 2. The torment touches that part of the body with which they committed the sin. For example, they can be hung by that part of the body, like women who braided their hair, not for good, but to seduce men, and are hung by their hair. Or the sinful part of the body can be tortured in a different way. For example, who cursed justice eats his own tongue. And the second type, it's an analogical correspondence between sin and punishment. It can be metaphorical correspondence, for example, who gave alms claiming to be righteous but did not seek justice, become blind and deaf, wearing white robes over hot coals. Here the white dress symbolizes that these individuals were also engaged in virtuous actions, while their condition of blindness and deafness indicates that these acts were superficial and hypocritical. The second type of analogical correspondence present in this protovision is the consecutive correspondence, when hell stabilizes a condition resulting from sin. One example, parents who kill their children. We see the mother's milk coagulates and become putrid, with carnivorous beasts rising from it. And the third type is the contrary type, when punishment is opposed to the scene. One example, rich people who despised widows, mothers, and orphans become clothed in rags and filthy rags. And the Apocalypse of Peter is a main source for the Visio Sancti Pauli, which is at the same time the archetype of medieval vision literature and part of it through its widespread popularity for hundreds of years. Obviously, Paul's vision is a branch of tradition that has been transmitted in many versions in Western Europe, and the redactions 6 and 11 have strong insular and Irish connections. In Paul's vision, various types of punishments are taken from the Apocalypse of Peter, but one of its novelties is the motive of a gradual immersion, which from now on becomes a topos of the visions. Like fornicators are submerged up to the navel in the fiery river, and detractors and quarrelsome are immersed up to the lips. A similar form of immersion is depicted in 2 rivers of Dante's Inferno, in the Phlegethon, where violent individuals bathe in boiling blood, tyrants are immersed up to their eyebrows, murderers up to their throats. The group of those who wounded others emerges from the river with the head and torso, whereas the truculent ones only have their feet immersed in the river. Similarly, traitors are immersed gradually in the Cocytus, depending on the severity of their betrayal. In the vision of St. Paul, the 9 hellish plagues are depicted together for the first time, which will be important features of the medieval representations of hell, namely, 1, fire, then frost and snow, 3, an angel cutting of lips and tongue with a large razor knife to pass witnesses. The same happens to the swords of discord in the 9th Borgia of Dante's Malebolgia. 4, the punishment of Tantalus, a topos from the oldest descriptions of the underworld, i.e. being surrounded by various kinds of fruit and not being able to take any, which afflicts those who break their fast before that time. In Dante's Purgatory, like in the vision of St. Paul, the punishment of Tantalus is represented as the purification of the gluttonous. 5, parents who kill their infants, e.g. by throwing them to dogs or pigs and torn to pieces by beasts. The same kind of torment awaits Dante's wasters in the 13th canto of the Inferno. 6, in contrast, being thrown into a pit and devoured by worms coincides with the oldest biblical concept of Sheol before the influence of Hellenism on Jewish thought. 7, pitch and sulfur are part of the infernal scenario, constituent elements of the punishment of monks who did not act according to religion. They are dressed in rags, soaked in pitch and sulfur, where the guilt is linked to the punishment in a similar way to Dante's punishment of hypocrites. 8. Furthermore, the punitive presence of serpents, which characterizes Dante's Brig of Thieves, also appears for the first time in the Visio Pauli. 9. The punishment of suffering in the flames in a fetid pit, closed with 7 seals awaiting those who did not believe in the incarnation of Christ, will be recalled in Dante's punishment of heretics, suffering inside fiery tombs. Passing by these souls, Dante will be struck by the stench, lezzo, whose characterizing role is accentuated by being chosen as the last word of Canto 10. Tundalus's vision, dating from the mid-12th century, was a bestseller in its own right. It was translated into 15 languages until the 15th century, including into Tuscan in the early 14th century and partly also in Hungarian. Tundalus's vision is a significant precursor to Dante's comedy. Both works feature 9 distinct punishment sites for different types of damned souls and are divided into 2 sections, an upper hell and a lower hell. The presence of hybrid monster with a punitive function is a notable innovation in this vision, influencing subsequent literary and artistic representations of hell from Dante to Bosch. Elements of the 2 scenes in this text are likely to have contributed to Dante's vision. The last of the clergy is punished with particular severity. A bird-headed monster sits on a frozen lake like Cocytus, eating and evacuating the reprobate. The monster devours them until they become nothing, and then brings them to life in the frozen lake, where they gather and renew themselves to suffer torment once more. The infinite cycle of annihilation and resurrection is evident in the hell of the Scala Mahometi. It can be postulated that in Dante's Bolgia dei Ladri, the incineration and subsequent recomposition of Vanni Fucci occurs not just once, but repeatedly following this pattern. Yes, I need to. The Lucifer of Tundalus's vision, bound in the depths of hell, prefigures Dante's Satan in his position, in his powerlessness, in his function of torturing sinners who deny Christ altogether or deny him by their actions. The logic of contrapasso is implied here. Those who deny Christ become the prey of the fallen angel. In fact, numerous examples for contrapasso can be found in Tundalus's vision. In the following, I will mention only a few examples which might show the influence of medieval visions on Dante's system of punishments. 2 of the most common counter-sufferings from the early Middle Ages onwards are those of the last wood, but also for the gluttons. In Tundalus's vision, the gluttons burn in Christinus mountain-big oven. The executioners are equipped with a variety of instruments, including axes, knives, cleavers, which they use to flay, cut, and chop the souls to pieces, recalling how the gluttons' meals have been prepared on earth. Meanwhile, the souls feel unquenchable craving for food, which could never be satiated. This element of the contrapasso was already present in the Apocalypse of Peter and will return in Dante's Purgatory. The money hoarders are punished in the forge, Vulcanus' workshop, where they are subjected to a process of distillation by means of furnace and bellows, liquefying them in a manner analogous to the liquefaction of iron. This process results in the reduction of burning souls to a state of almost nothingness. Once the souls have been liquefied, they are poked with iron tridents and beaten with anvils until they were reduced to a uniform mass. Accordingly, this implied that the souls of the money hoarders have to go through the process of making their most cherished earthly possessions in the afterlife. Instead of having one clear equivalent in Dante, this counter-punishment has thematically related looser parallels in the Commedia that show the significance of the contrapasso for both medieval visions and Dante's work. In sum, the vision of Tundalus is an excellent example of medieval vision that used the thematic link between crime and punishment as a narrative device and a special way of describing imaginative places. Given that Dante's case, it's not only the genre of medieval vision in general and of its fundamental structural importance, but also the phenomenon of contrapasso in particular that becomes an exceptional literary motif, determining the arrangement of the Inferno and the Purgatory. The vision of Tundalus is a good example of the close connection between medieval visionary literature and Dante's Commedia, both at the structural and thematic level. Thank you.
Thank you, Eszter. That was a great way to start off looking at typologies. Elsina, while I'm introducing Emily, yeah, sorry, that's one. Just when it comes to
the mouse there.
okay, there. Okay, that's a wonderful way to start looking at typologies, as I said, and I'm really delighted Eszter brought that whole aspect up as our first paper of the day. Our second speaker comes from closer to home, and is Dr. Emily Carthaigh. She is a lecturer here in UCC in the Department of Early and Medieval Irish, and a member of the Locus project. And over lunch, she can tell you all about Locus. It's a fascinating thing. She's a great fan of it. Her research interests include literary and historical analysis of early Irish lyric poetry and classical modern Irish poetry. So she is quite unique in that she can speak across a whole variety of different areas, looking at editions and translations of old, middle, and classical modern Irish texts, particularly poetry. Also modern Irish translations of Dante's Divina Commedia, and for any of you who were around during the 2021 Dante celebrations we had the very final one was called Irish in Dante, and she really gave a wonderful talk on that occasion about metre and rhythm in some of these translations of Dante, Padraig de Brún and Christopher Crumb. She also works on Irish onomastics and medieval Irish eschatology. She has a fascinating title. I'm going to read it out in full because it is a paper in and of itself. From 7 heavens to 27, and from Inferno to Paradiso and back, how the journey of the soul, the Irish tradition compares with Dante's vision of hell and heaven. And she's also one of my dearest friends, and I don't know after roping her into this if our friendship will last, but would you please put your hands together for Emma.
Morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Elsina and Eszter, for the invitation to speak here today. Elsina and myself had a very nice conversation there recently on the back of a seminar paper that that she delivered to the Italian Department of School of Languages not that long ago, and an extraordinary exploration of wounds. And it was out of that conversation that that I decided that Elsina decided to ask me to join you today. So there's somebody wants to get in there, I think. So I hope that this will work now. I must speak to the president or the registrar or something about this computer here and this mouse and all of it. It's designed to cause maximum stress to a speaker. So let me just check this. All right. Now, as I got carried away with the length of the title, and but at the same time, I wanted to explain in it what I was going to try and do today. And the first part of this title is a little bit fanciful, from 7 heavens to 27. However, it is intended to point up the extent of the difference between the ascent of the soul through 7 heavens in the medieval Irish 7 heavens apocryphon, which ultimately probably derives from one of the redactions of the Visio Sancti Pauli, already mentioned by Eszter just now, and Dante's vision in the Commedia of what awaits the soul after death. Now, some of you here will be familiar already with the Insular 7 Heavens apocryphon, but most of you probably won't. And since today is specifically a study day, I want to make a case study of one version in particular of the Insular 7 Heavens apocryphon. And I will be bringing you along to a very late part of the tradition up to the 18th century. The account I want to look at in particular today, although I will consider earlier accounts to some degree as well, this account is an 18th century redaction of the medieval apocryphon, the medieval Insular 7 Heavens apocryphon, and it is interpolated into an 18th century redaction of a long old Irish tract known as In Tenge Vis Nuil, or the Ever New Tongue, relatively recently edited in full in its early recensions by John Carey, who's with us here today and who will speak later. The first recension of this, the first and second, edited by John, date to the 9th or 10th century. And the Ever New Tongue is a medieval account of the mysteries of creation and the cosmos as related by the so-called Ever New Tongue, which is the soul of Philip the Apostle, who converses with the wise men or the elders of the Hebrews in this angelic language, or the language of the angels. So Katrina, my colleague Katrina and myself often joke about the idea of this little tongue hovering, chatting away to in our darker days. We used to try and cheer ourselves up with such nonsense. But however, Philip the Apostle is chatting away to the elders of the Hebrews, and this is a classic kind of medieval narrative framework in the question answer format, where the elders of the Hebrews ask questions of the Ever New Tongue, who is somewhat omniscient. And the original text of the Ever New Tongue, the Old Irish recension, includes a description of the cosmological 7 heavens. Now, I would like to consider 2 things in particular today. Firstly, I would like to concentrate on how this cosmological account of the 7 heavens was revised by the 18th century redactor. And I would like to concentrate on, I suppose, this cosmological account to some degree, and to consider how it is perhaps possible that the Commedia itself was a possible influence on this revision. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would like to concentrate on is the interpolation of the redaction of the medieval insular eschatological 7 heavens apocryphon into the 18th century redaction of the Tanga, this Ever New Tongue text. So the medieval version has an account of the cosmological account of the 7 heavens. The later version has that same account, but it's different in the 18th century version. It's very different from the medieval version. And then there is this interpolation of the eschatological 7 heavens into the 18th century redaction of the Ever New Tongue also. And I'm going to attempt, I suppose, to demonstrate the ways in which this interpolation of the account of the eschatological 7 heavens is presented in its own literary and apocryphal tradition, and how that compares with Dante's ascent through hell, purgatory and paradise. Comparing the insular apocryphon with the Commedia is not really comparing like with like. The insular apocryphon is extremely short, the Commedia is extremely long, but they both belong to the same tradition, even though they are very different iterations of that tradition. While the insular apocryphon derives from the Visio Sancti Pauli, it does not maintain the immediacy of the viewpoint of the individual in the first person. Dante does maintain this viewpoint, as you all know, and he painstakingly creates a vision of unparalleled depth and detail. This is missing from the Irish version, or the insular version, I should say. So today I want to consider these 2 very different accounts of the ascent of the soul to judgment after death in terms of their literary presentation. Oh yeah, the slides, how do they move along? Oh, you have to press this thing, is it? For that? Here? Oh, right, thanks. Thanks, Elsina. So there are 4 extant insular versions of the medieval 7 heavens apocryphon preserved in Old Irish, Middle Irish, Modern Irish and Old English. It survives as an interpolation in the Feet Adamnan, or the Vision of Adamnan, which dates from the 10th century, also edited recently by John Carey. And the Eszter Clare Colum Kille, Kevin Murray, who's here now today, has worked on this. It is also interpolated into that text, this adventure of St. Colum Kille's clerics, and that interpolation was probably borrowed from the Feet Adamnan, so they're more or less the same thing. Katrina O'Doherty edited Na Seach Nava, or the 7 heavens, as they occur in the 15th century Liber Flavus Fergusiorum. And this is a standalone text. It is just the 7 heavens, the description stands on its own. It's not interpolated into any other larger text. And then we have the 3rd recension, or the modern recension of the Ever New Tongue that I've just mentioned. And as you can see there are 28 extant manuscripts spread among all these libraries here: the Royal Irish Academy, the National Library of Ireland, Trinity College, Maynooth, the British Library and the Scottish Library, the National Library of Scotland. And there are 20 manuscripts survive from the 18th century and 18 from the 19th. And the language of the manuscripts is contemporary with that at the time of writing. So it is modern Irish, somewhat archaic compared to the Irish of today, but it is modern Irish. And then, interestingly, and Nicole Vollmering is here today, she has edited the Old English account that forms part of a homily in Cambridge Corpus Christi College manuscript 41. And these accounts are all very clearly related and seem to go back to some redaction of the Visio Sancti Pauli's vision. And here is a nice example of, this isn't the actual homily in which we have the seven heavens in the Corpus Christi manuscript, but that just shows you the extent of the marginal homilies and material in this particular manuscript. So the ever new tongue then, and the recensions of it. The first recension, as I've mentioned, is Old Irish, dated from the Old Irish period and the Middle Irish period are there, just for those of you who aren't familiar with the timeframes in question. And this account dates from the 9th or 10th century, and it is preserved only in the Book of Lismore, which is now here in Cork, and here is the opening of it on the slide. The second recension is in 4 main manuscripts, but there are some other ones as well, I think, and it's late Middle Irish, and it constitutes a separate recension, and as I said, John has edited both of those recensions in his edition with Corpus Christianorum. The third recension is the late one, as I've mentioned, and it is in 38 manuscripts. And I edited the eschatological seven heavens apocryphon as found as an interpolation in this modern recension. And it was a killer, I must say, to go through all those manuscripts and all those different versions. I don't know if I ever got over it really. So anyhow, we have here I want to, I suppose, show here how the insular seven heavens apocryphon extant in 4 sources corresponds to everything we find in the Commedia. So this short little apocryphon covers everything from Inferno to Paradiso, except in the insular version, some of the souls go back. And I will come back to that in a minute. Now, if we look at all of the recensions of In Tangavit's Nua, the cosmological seven heavens occur in all 3 of them. And this corresponds to the Paradiso of the Commedia. However, the cosmological seven heavens in recensions 1 and 2 is different from that in recension 3. And recension 3 interpolates this extra apocryphon, this eschatological seven heavens. And the 1, 2, and 3, I suppose the cosmological seven heavens, I would like to look at those first. As I say, they correspond to the 9 celestial bodies of Paradiso and the Empyrean. And as you can see here, I found a lovely image there of the various planets and the sun, and even the moon is there, which is important in this account as well. So, but in this later recension of In Tangavit's Nua and the 4 earlier versions of the Seven Heavens Apocryphon, this eschatological account of journey of the soul after death to judgment corresponds to the entire of the Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso, as I have already said. So, looking then at the cosmological seven heavens, in Tangavit's Nua, and this is the later recension, we have a reference to the cosmological seven heavens in terms of the moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Saturnius. A high heaven is mentioned, even though the elders of the Hebrews refer to 7 heavens, we only get reference to 6. A high heaven is the 6th, and there's a sky about each of these heavens, 3 skies about these, sorry for the typing error, and then there's stars. And the stars, there are fruits and a full sky, and there are dragons, and there's a little dragon from the book of Kells. We were very proud of him when we were working on the De Finibus project. So we have, we can see a direct correspondence here with how the spheres come about in the Paradiso, where the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the fixed stars of faith, hope, and love, and the primum mobile with the angels and the Empyrean. So there is a very clear correspondence here, but this version of it only occurs in the late recension of the Tangavit's Nua. So Dante's configuration of Paradiso is arranged according to the Ptolemaic understanding of the earth and the cosmos that was commonplace in the Middle Ages. According to Ptolemy's reckoning, the earth was surrounded by a sphere of earth, one of fire, surrounding that, and 10 heavens beyond that, again, as we see here. These are the heavens of the moon, of Mercury, of Venus, of the sun, of Mars, of Jupiter, of Saturn, of the fixed stars, the primum mobile, and of the Empyrean, as I've said. Now, you will see here, and this is recension 2, just to give you an example, only the moon is mentioned in the early recension of the Tangavit's Nua. So this correspondence, this Ptolemaic correspondence, is not found in the earlier recensions, but it is found in the late recension. So this is just a summary, that's just a summary that I just showed you there, and here is just a summary of the cosmological account in recension 3, in the late recension of the time of its Nua. So as we see in this summary, this summary, I suppose, reading it suggests that the redactor had access to some iteration of the Ptolemaic model or to the Commedia itself. Now, considering the renewed popularity of the Commedia in the 18th century all over Europe, and also considering Carlo d'Aquino's Latin translation of it in 1728, it is plausible that the redactor of the modern recension of the Teng of its Nua had read the Commedia and was influenced by its depiction of Paradiso when he set out to translate the tongue of its Nua into modern Irish in the 18th century and to revise it. In addition, his insertion of the Seven Heavens Apocryphon demonstrates a particular interest in the ascent of the soul to judgment after death. And we know from our work on the De Finibus project that the Irish were quite obsessed with that. So we can see here how recensions 1 and 2, which are depicted on the left, do not correspond to the Ptolemaic model that we find in the modern recension on the right. You can see how they differ here on the slide. Now, moving on to the eschatological account, the eschatological seven heavens, and this is just a reminder of what I looked at a minute ago. These are the sources for the insular seven heavens apocryphon in the insular tradition. Now, looking at these two versions of the ascent of the soul from hell to heaven in very simple terms. And when I say two versions, I mean the insular tradition here, which corresponds to the entirety of the Commedia. We can say in summary that the Commedia depicts one moment in time, if time is the right word, when describing a vision of hell, purgatory, and heaven by a human who has somehow got lost in a wood and ended up down in hell. However, it seems to, if you look at it in its simplest terms, the Commedia seems to me to depict one moment in time. The moment in time that I mean is Dante's vision and his experience of these realms as he passes through them, experiencing each briefly and leaving each one in order to move on to the next. It may be more accurate to say that the poem portrays a series of single moments within a short time frame. This experience is conveyed to the reader in the same first-person narrative that makes the Pauline Visio so immediate and so dramatic. The figures encountered in the three realms that Dante visits have already been judged, or they are languishing at the moment of Dante's experience in purgatory, waiting to see what happens. His is a deeply personal experience of each moment that he spends in this other world. And in spite of the expanse of his vision, he is the only constant throughout. The entire experience is his alone. The souls he encounters are stuck, and it is Dante who must continue to press on with the help of various psychopomps accompanying him at various intervals. On the other hand, it is the souls of the dead who must press on in the insular seven heavens apocryphon as found in recension 3, or the modern recension of the Teng of its Nua, and in the three earlier insular versions mentioned earlier. The description of the seven heavens in this version is couched in a very different narrative framework from that adopted by Dante. The journey from hell to heaven is described by an omniscient narrator, or in the case of recension 3 of the Ever New Tongue, that is the soul of Philip the Apostle, who takes on the role of an omniscient narrator. This ascent through the seven heavens is not depicted as a personal experience, and it is not a remotely emotional account. In the version relayed by the soul of Philip, the narrator undergoes no emotional or spiritual transformation and remains disconnected from the experience of the souls that he describes. In this account, the narrator coolly represents how all souls pass through each of the seven heavens, from hell up to paradise, where every one of them meets their maker and is judged. It is a very matter-of-fact account. The only characters resembling kindly psychopomps in this account are the archangels Michael, Ariel, and Raphael, who remain impassive throughout the execution of their duties and do not speak to really or interact with the souls. The righteous find welcome and reward, and the damned are sent back down to hell via appalling means, which we will return to later, in spite of the early hour of the morning. The text illustrates all of this in very general terms by comparisons with Dante's detailed taxonomy of the souls he encounters and the emotional and spiritual upheaval and development that he himself undergoes. Now, in order to demonstrate this to you, I've decided to consider today the very latest version of this apocryphon, as I mentioned already. rather than the earliest extant version of the Apocryphon, which dates back to at least the 10th century. So here are the details of the 3 recensions again of the Tongue of Nua that I looked at earlier, and the latest version of the Apocryphon is found in recension 3 there at the bottom, and here's an example of it from one of the manuscripts in the National Library of Ireland. My reason for selecting the 18th century vision is to show how the redactors of that time were both antiquarians and innovators who were widely read in Old and Middle Irish texts like Fish Adamnan, or the Vision of Adamnan, and recensions 1 and 2 of the Tongue of Nua. The renewed interest in the Tongue of Nua in the 18th century demonstrates the continuity of tradition from the Old to the modern Irish periods, and reveals something of the continuity of tradition from the Old to something of the zeitgeist among the learned classes in Ireland at the time. The redactors and scribes of this recension of the Tongue of Nua were fascinated by hell and heaven as their predecessors had been, and I suppose as we still are today. It's sort of wearying, isn't it? The endless thought of it. However, now this I think is partly the motivation that led to the interpolation of the Seven Heavens Apocryphon into the modern Irish recension of the Tongue of Nua. The Apocryphon is cleverly stitched into the original structure of the text, in that it is portrayed as an answer to one of the many questions in that question-answer narrative framework I mentioned earlier, by the elders of the Hebrews to the ever-new tongue, or the soul of Philip the Apostle. So just after section 62, as per John Carey's edition, as we see here, the elders asked the ever-new tongue to describe the 7 heavens leading up to the heavenly dwelling. So in 62, it goes along nicely. It is right for you to be seeking God's forgiveness, said the apostle, and so on. And then suddenly, recension 3, with no warning, inserts the 7 heavens Apocryphon. And then after it finishes, it takes up the text as per the earlier recensions and goes on. So somebody somewhere decided to do this. Why did they decide to do this? Now, here is a summary of the first part of this Apocryphon, and I will let you look at it for a moment while I continue to perhaps draw a few conclusions from this, from the insertion of this Apocryphon, from the fact that this was interpolated into this late recension. What does Philip the Apostle describe in this Apocryphon, in this version of it? What he describes constitutes a timetable for judgment. The catalogue of torments, places, and the characters who mete out punishments or rewards is matter-of-fact and sparse, while remaining extremely vivid. The matter-of-fact tone and the sparseness of the prose gives a sense of bustling hurry. The production line of judgment that is depicted is constantly churning souls through the system. The narrator is not at any point affected by what he describes, unlike Dante, who is deeply affected by what he encounters. The ever-new tone gives us a matter-of-fact and generalized or universal view of what journey awaits the soul after death. Recension 3 of the Tongue of Nua displays many innovations on the part of the original redactor or later redactors. For example, in the first instance, the language is translated from Old or Middle Irish into modern. The 7 heavens Apocryphon is interpolated between section 62 and 63 of the earlier recension, and the cosmological 7 heavens have been edited to reflect the Ptolemaic schema. There is no accompanying commentary giving a clue as to the motivation for these innovations. However, the fact that the first redactor went to the trouble of translating the text from medieval to modern Irish suggests renewed interest in the text in the 18th century. It also suggests that the redactor who first translated the text in the 18th, the redactor who first translated the text wished it to be read, recited, or perhaps used as material for sermons, perhaps, by his contemporaries. This redactor did not sit down to copy out a medieval text for the sake of preserving it. He wanted it to be used in his own time. He deliberately translated it into the modern Irish of his own time so that it would be accessible to his literate contemporaries, not just scholars of the medieval language. Considering that 38 known copies are extant, testifies to the huge popularity of the text, and the insertion of the 7 heavens Apocryphon demonstrates that the redactors had read and taken a particular interest in the text. Ultimately, the 18th century revision of the Tongue of Nua may well demonstrate knowledge of the Commedia by a particular Irish redactor at the time of translation. It also demonstrates the preoccupation with what awaits us beyond the grave. And I will leave you with the last the last bit of this Apocryphon, which leads us from Lazarus to Michael to the point where the soul is separated from the face of God, having been judged. The impious soul is separated, and at its rejection by Christ, it emits a terrible sigh. And then this is the part where it has gone through the 7 heavens and is sent all the way back. 12 serpents of the devil swallow the impious soul, each one chewing it and letting it out through its anus, delightfully into the mouth of the next serpent, until it is at last released unto the claws of the devil, and it is dragged by Lucifer to be bathed in the streams that you're all very familiar with. And this is an image from 15th century chapel in Bulgaria, where we see Christ's judgment here, and this rope with the damned slithering down into the jaws of this very ugly looking serpent. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Emma. That was brilliant. And, you know, and also wonderful the fact that going to heaven can form part of punishment as well. That's really fantastic. So our final speaker for this session, then we will have a discussion, is Filippo Ungar. Filippo is a PhD candidate at the Scuola Superiore Meridionale in the University of Naples, and also with the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. His main research interests are the Italian vulgarizations of the other world visions and their relationship with Dante's conflict. Filippo, a te la parola.
Thank you. Okay. You should have an handout that I will follow, and thank you to the organizers for this beautiful invitation. My paper will present, as the title says, the circulation of the Visio Tundali in the Italian Incunabula, print edition of the 15th century. Before entering inside the subject, allow me to make a little premise. This is the topic on which I am working on in these precise months. So I will not present the theme with the definitiveness and the certainty that only a long reflection can give. However, I thought, and I hope that you will agree at the end, that this opportunity could be perfect for me to present a first overview of the situation in order to receive observation and ideas useful to finalize my work on this subject. First, I spend only a few words about the diffusion of the Visio Tundali translated in Italian, in the which handwritten tradition was quantified in 13 manuscripts 2 years ago. And I try to go on.
What's that thing?
Okay. Okay.
So you have it.
Yeah. Was quantified in 13 manuscripts 2 years ago by Speranza Cerullo in an article that is the most important reference for my research. This is the list of the manuscripts. You can see it probably. I don't know how to.
I know.
Okay, that's it. According to the scholar, the Italian vernacular tradition depends on the original text of Marcus and was articulated in 5 or 6 different versions. That is the term that she uses for a text already, a text that is directly translated from Latin, and 2 or 3 more redaction if the version is reworked from an already vulgarized text. These 8 different textual typologies are divided into 2 groups called alpha and beta, distinguished by the fact that alpha versions more accurately respect the narrative structure of the source, while betas have a more substantial revision of the diegetic structures. I offer just a brief presentation of each text taken from Cerullo's reconstruction. This is the Alpha 1, and you see on the slides you see the manuscript will that testimony the different version. Alpha 1 is the 14th century Tuscan version edited by Corazzini in 1872. Instead, Alpha 2 is a Venetian redaction probably dated at the end of the 14th century and based on Alpha 1 edited by Giuliari in 1870. Alpha 3 instead is a Venetian version of the text, still inedited, dated probably at the second half of the 15th century. This is the only one that conserves the prologue of Marcus. Alpha 4 is another unstudied Tuscan version of the text, dated probably at the second half of the 15th century. Beta 1 is the principal version of this second group, certainly dating back to the 14th century and circulating in Tuscany and in Veneto, with directions that are still unclear. Beta 2 could be a reduction based on Beta 1 or a new version of the text, and the codex, that testimonies it, was copied by the merchant Pace di Giuliano della Scarperia in Milan in 1462. Beta 3 is the one that I will present more in detail because it is witnessed in every manuscript, and then it is the version circulating in the prints, and it is a reduction based on Beta 1 made in the 15th century. The text of the 1479 Byzantine edition was the one published by Villari in 1865. Beta 4, the last, is likely another version of the text written in Umbrian dialect. I am able, okay. The text of Beta 3, as I just said, had a significant circulation even in the early prints, because it was added to the print edition of the Vitae dei Santi Padri. The Vitae Patrum, in 2 words, are a collection of legendary biographies and examples of the Holy Desert Fathers written by several authors and translated from Greek to Latin in the 6th century. The Italian version, entitled Vitae dei Santi Padri, was very, very popular. We have 191 manuscripts and was made by the Dominican friar Domenico Cavalca in Pisa between the 2nd and the 3rd decade of the 14th century. The Cavalca translation is organized in 4 parts. The first 3, even if with some changes in the order, have the same content of the Latin source. Instead, the 4th was defined by Carlo del Corno, recent editor of the text, a very personal construction made by Cavalca that assembles some of the most famous hagiographic texts and other materials taken from the exemplar literature. This 4th book, therefore, was perfectly suited to be increased with other legends. And this is the case of the Visio Tundali that was added at the end of this book in the printed edition of the text. On the consistency of this dissemination, there was not a recognition in bibliography. And even the census of the Vitae edition in Italian is still offered only in a book, this one that you see, made by Arturo Cioni in 1962, that counts 16 incunabula and 20 16th century editions. Thanks to the principal online database nowadays available, mostly ISTC, USTC, and the Italian Edit 16, I could increase this number to 20 editions of the 15th century and 14 of the following one, and 43 of the following one. Cioni already has divided these editions in 2 classes. The first is called A, reports only the 4th part of Cavalca vulgarization and is represented in the 2 first editions printed in Ferrara and Sant'Orso Vicenza in 1474, both. The second, called B, is the text that we can define Vulgate because all the other 61 editions reflect the same scheme, this one. Class B editions transmit the text, the entire text of the Vitae organized in 5 parts instead of 4 of the original, usually indicated as books, with the addition of the Johannes Moscus Pratus Spiritualis, that is another collection of examples of your Oriental monks in the Italian translation made by Feobel Carey, presented as the 6th part of the whole collection. The Visio Tundali is present in 34 of these 61 editions, all the ones published before the 1562 edition. And you have here the list. The Visio, therefore, is attested in over a half of the printed edition of the Vitae. It is a very significant circulation, especially if compared to the only 13 survived manuscripts. It could perhaps be said that this is the vernacular version of the text that has had the greatest success in Italy. The next table, this one, in this table, I propose an index of the text containing in the 5th book of the editions. That remains the same in all the 15th century editions and is compared in the 3rd column that you see, is compared on the right, is compared with the chapters in the Corno edition of the original vulgarization made by Cavalca. So as you can see, the 5th book reproposes almost precisely the 2nd part of the 4th book in the Corno edition, starting from chapter 50, without changing the order of the legends. Then, in the ending, there is the addition of 2 texts and the Visio Tundali in the ending. This situation is conservative and does not seem to leave space for the hypothesis that behind the subject subdivision into 5 books, there is hidden an important revision of the text. It is remarkable that no less than 4 of the tales contained in the 5th book are connected to the other worldly literature, the Vita Macari Romani, the Visio Fursei inside the life of St. Fursi, the mention of the Purgatory in the life of St. Patrick that you see in the 3rd from the back, and the Visio Tundali itself, and that seems to be a particular focus on the Irish context. Fursei, Patrick, Tundalus, but this similarity in content were largely already present in the organization of Cavalca's original text. Probably the first editor of the 5-book text decided to start a new book with the Macarius tale because it has a prologue at the beginning, circumstance that may have led him to think that at that point there was originally a stronger partition of the text. Perhaps instead, the fact that various Irish texts were concentrated in the latter part of the collection may have contributed to the decision to add the Visio Tundali at the end. Now, I will focus briefly on the text that you have in the first table of the handout that I reproposed only in part in this slide. That is the printed vision text, which is always preserved with great constancy in the different editions. It is the one that Cerullo named as Beta 3. It's subdivided in 17 chapters, which reproduce almost the entire content of the Latin Visio according to the correspondence summarized in the table that you have. I would emphasize here only the most microscopic divergence between the vernacular text and the Latin source, which are particularly located in 3 places, the ones that you see in the slide, highlighted in bold in the 3rd column on the right of the handout. For the most part, these innovations are shared also by Beta 1 and therefore are characteristic of that text and not only of the text worked in Beta 3. The first concerns the opening chapter, which in the Italian text omits both the Marcus's prologue and the Ireland description. Moreover, the figure of Marcus is completely removed. It is Tundalus himself who writes down his vision. Again, the initial presentation of Tundalus' habits and vices is very rich of details, and the exit of the soul from the body is set in the context of a wedding feast, removing the figure of the debtor friend. The second place of innovation occurs at the beginning of the visit to paradise in chapter 11 and 12. In the vernacular text, chapter 11 is short and devoted only to the exit of the angel and the soul from hell, which correspond to the first half of chapter 15 in the Latin text of Marcus, and chapter 12 then combines two stories which are separated in the Latin text. The one of the vision of the souls of the Rei ma non troppo, non valde malorum, who are outside the wall that surrounds paradise and are punished with hunger and cold, the second part of chapter 15, and that of the splendid house inside which, in a condition of half punishment and half glory, lies the throne of King Cormac, whose name is removed in the vernacular version in favor of an unnamed king. In between, chapters 16 and 17 are entirely omitted. The third place of innovation is found in the final chapter, that is probably the more interesting. The text in Italian describes the last very high wall that opens chapter 23, the Gloria Virginum et Nover Ordinibus Angelorum, and then passes directly to the final chapter, the 26th, about the return to the soul to the body, omitting entirely the chapters containing the encounter with the saints Rodan and Patrick and with the Irish bishops. Even the final chapter differs greatly from the Latin. After the return to the body, Tundalos receives communion and makes the sign of the cross as in the original text. Afterwards, however, not only he begins to preach and lead a holy life, but he also decides to leave all his possessions to the poor, and dressed in poor clothes, he leaves for the Indian desert, where he leads a life of abstinence, penitence, and hermitage for 35 years, until the Lord grants him access to the glory of paradise. This innovation makes it possible to check certain features of the text. Firstly, it reduces the Irish context of the vision almost to disappearance. Second, it organizes the subject into three distinct sections: the first, infernal; the second, purgatorial; and the third, heavenly. This tendency is already explicit from the opening heading that you find in the table, and that's here. I read it. Incomincia la visione di Tantolo, il quale fu all'inferno, in purgatorio, hell, purgatory, e in paradiso, e nota quello che vide, udì, sentì. Later, it is repeated in the heading of chapter 12, the one that is totally reworked, in which there is the sole other occurrence of the term purgatorio in the text, and does not seem a case that this is precisely the chapter that collects the only surviving scenes of a condition that is neither infernal nor paradisiacal. This is how the heading reads, and you find it here. Della gloria del primo albergo che mostrò l'angelo all'anima e del suo re, e del purgatorio, purgatory, e del paradiso. This tendency to structure the afterlife in three distinct realms, being alien to the original Latin text, can perhaps be related to Dante's model, even if it is typical of the 15th century afterlife images. The third and last aspect of the text concerns the strengthening of the edifying dimension, especially through the ending rewriting, also needed to make the Tundalos vision a perfect example, appropriate with the context of the Vitae Patrum collection. We are thus faced with a text in which the exemplary dimension is particularly emphasized, to the extent that it was included for almost a century in the canon of the Holy Desert Fathers' model lives. This textual typology can be ascribed to the wide production destined for private, devotional, and edifying reading, addressed, being in the vernacular, both to clerics and lay people. Actually, this circulation unites all the Italian version of the Visio Tundali, and the same is for Italian translation of other world vision, such as the Visio Pauli. This is, it needs to be clearly stated, a circulation environment that seems totally distinct from literary text, and thus also from Dante's comedy. Now, I would like to stop my attention in the last part of my paper, 2 minutes, on the Class B edition of the Vita dei Santi Padri. They are, as I said, 61, 18 incunabula and 43 15th century edition, 34 of which contain the Visio Tundali. Here, I briefly dwell only on the feature of the incunabula, and I go on with the slide, using the second table that you have in the handout, that I will show only in part in the slides. Generally, apart from the elimination of the Visio at one point and some other singular changes, considering the content, Class B edition text is not subjected to major revisions. In terms of structure, format, collation, and mise-en-page, the first 2 editions, Gabriele Di Pietro not later than 1474 and Antonio di Bartolomeo Viscomini about 1475, provide a model that will be repeated several times. The former will return in edition 3 and 4, you can check in the handout, and the latter in the edition 7, printed in Vicenza by Hermannus Liechtenstein, 1479. This is the one that Villari had used for the edition. Then Bernardino di Pino, edition of 1483, number 8 in the table, autonomous in its collection and mise-en-page, is significant because it is the first to add the running headers in the text, which greatly facilitate reading and which present would become constant from the edition of Giovanni Ragazzo onwards. These editions are also the first to add illustration. In particular, Giovanni Ragazzo for Lucantonio Giunta, 25 of June 1491, is the first dated. The edition has 387 xylographical illustrations inserted into the text, in widths corresponding to the space of one column, of which 12 are included in the Visio Tundali text. 8 of those are representing scenes from the Visio Tundali. Of the other 4, this is the table, it's the 12 in the handout, the one I'm talking about. So 12 images of the Visio Tundali and 8 representing scenes from the Visio Tundali. Of the other 4, 2 are repeats and 2 are illustration of other texts in the collection. The same xylograph matrices found in this edition are also reused in almost all the subsequent editions, usually in the number of 10, again with individual illustrations sometimes taken by mistake from other texts. As can be seen, these editions are also often particularly similar in terms of collection and mise-en-page, and they have the same running headers. Of the editions print in the 15th century, the only one that changes the xylograph matrices is the Milan edition in 1499, although it still retains the same subjects. Now, in the next slides, I present briefly the subjects to let you see them. This is the first of the initial chapter with the subject of Tundalus lying unconscious during the initial banquet. As you can see, the Milan illustration has the same content, is the one on the right, but it is specular to the Venetian one, mirrored. The second, this one, is a pluriscenic illustration regarding chapter 4, in which is represented the fiery from left to right, the fiery valley of the Insidious, the bridge crossed by the Righteous, and Tundalus facing the monster Acheron, tormentor of the arrogance. The Milan illustration again is specular to the other. The third, this one, is about chapter 5, representing the pond in which the thieves are punished. Tundalus is carrying the cow over the spiked bridge, still mirrored the Milan illustration. And the others, I just have a look. This is the Furnace of Pristinus, another pluriscenic illustration with Tundalo and the devil, and Tundalus with the angel on the right. And the last, I would like to show you, this is the paradise, the only paradise illustration about the house of Cormac, without the name of the king. This is the last, because this is the last I chose for the handout, because it's the Ottinus de Luna edition of 1501, So it's the first of the 16th century and is the most important, I think, because it's the first to bear the indication of grace and privilege of printing on the title page and is a turning point in the publishing panorama. It is the first to make a difference in the content because it adds a brief episode regarding St. Nicholas at the end of the fifth book after the Visio Tundali, and completely reorganized the layout of the book and the illustrations, which for the Visio Tundali come to the number of 18, with a huge illustration at the beginning of the first scene. The other are one per chapter. This structure will later be maintained in the 16th century editions back. Okay, however, cursory, this first examination of the printed editions of the Visio Tundali in Italian gives an overview of a wide and stratified circulation. The text was received above all as an exemplary tale linked to the religion and devotional writings, of which the Vita dei Santi Padri are a fundamental text, quite distinct from literary production and thus also from Dante's comedy. Does not mean, however, that there are no contacts with Dante's text. The case of the three realms that I presented is a possible first example to which a more systematic study could add others in the text and I think also in the illustration. So this is a first review and thank you for your attention. Okay,
So I'm going to ask our three speakers to come up and sit down at the table. We can have a brief discussion. And thank you to all three for a really fascinating opening to today's proceedings, and really three very, very different but fascinating papers. And so, Emma, do you want to take a seat? Okay. Thanks. Okay, so as I said, three very different papers, but at the same time, something that struck me was the function of these texts. You know, what are they there for? Are they there for didactic purposes? Are they for preaching purposes? You know, you brought it up there at the end, Filippo. Certainly, Emma was talking about it, and you know, and Dante's text itself, you know, Pro del mondo che mal vivo. You know, this idea that there has to be a didactic function to it. But I want to start with you, Filippo, because I kind of work backwards, because you're talking about the removal of the Irish element in these. Why? Because it wasn't fitting into the collections that they were there, but why removed? Because it's a very interesting aspect of these. It's not that, at least from an Irish perspective. But why do you think those elements were excised?
I don't have a precise idea yet, but I think that they are in Italy, so they are far from that context. So probably King Cormac was not so known in terms of I can look at probably a printer.
This might be quite shocking to this audience here, so just be careful what you say.
But really beautiful was the printers of the 15th century probably had a problem with public.
Yeah.
And the Italian public could not be familiar to some subjects.
Well, you're mentioning, you know, who is this public?
Because even the manuscript edition and the print editions are related with these devotional publications that are common in Italy. I don't know in the England context, but in Italy are very, very common regarding life of saints, made in merchant streets for the private lecture of merchants, rich people, clerics and lay people, both. And that's why they are in the vernacular versions, because they are for lay people too, and for feminine convents, and so people that are not, they don't know the Latin language, and they read for devotion, for praying, for edifying. They read Life of Saints and very miscellaneous texts. So it's very different, and there are a lot of things inside. And the Visio Tundali have this particular reception in Italy inside this kind of text in the print edition. And they are hot, they are very a lot, so there was a lot of tapping. And I think I had to cut the paper about Einstein, the fact that the R3 manuscript, the manuscript that reports the visually in the same version that prints, it is made by a merchant, Florentine, in 1487, so after the Greeks, and contains 54 tales, religious tales, always got from the Vita dei Santi Padri plus B editions. I think that probably the merchant took as the source the edition, the print edition, and not a manuscript and written tradition before. But I don't know yet. I'm still trying to understand if it's like this, or otherwise there is an unwritten tradition in Florence before the print editions that this manuscript can reflect. So I don't know.
No, that's perfect. And Eszter, just on that particular point, because you mentioned there towards the end of your paper that there's a Hungarian translation we took that. Tell us a little. That's fascinating.
I believe we don't have many yellow policies, especially in parallel with Italy but we have a few from the very beginning of the 15th century, and these were used mostly in feminine monasteries, and which is very interesting, and nobody ever wrote about it, that they have almost only Irish visions, not in the whole, not as whole text, but like exemplar and parts of text, and they use Visio to say in predication and in sermons, and we have the translation 2 pages in this manuscript from the Indalus vision, and it's about the punishment of the last word. So it's it's an animation for yeah.
And sorry, when is that date from? That translation?
It's we have a copy. These policies are copied together, and we don't know when was it originally translated. We have this codex, which is dated to the 15th.
Okay, I'm giving this all very quiet, and no one has their hands up. I'll just say one more thing to Emma, if I may. I mean, Emma, that was brilliant and was fascinating. Thank you, if I pronounced it correctly. This 18th century redaction and this idea, and Filippo's almost touching on it as well. The assertion of good audio and this type of thing. When things are, certain cultural moments have happened and things become part of the collective memory, Dante becomes a figure, or even just a Ptolemaic tradition becomes more widespread, that you get then this kind of, these insertions into the text to give it a different type of structure, to kind of weigh it, or give it more of a kind of plausibility, or to kind of, as you said, it was also to be used for teaching purposes as well. But can there have been kind of, oddly enough, a kind of a Dantean influence in this area?
Well, I was thinking about it again when I haven't revisited the Seven Heavens background for a long time, really since I suppose we were, myself, Dante, and Nicole working on the project together, and so sometimes some years elapse, your brain has been working away in the background, and so I wanted to do something a little bit different from what I've done before today, and I was reconsidering it, and then it occurred to me again, at the time, I remember we talked about it a lot in various seminars that we ran, and what this modern recension is quite extraordinary. It's rather unexpected, and the fact that we have 38 extant manuscript witnesses, well, we know that if there are 38, there must have been many more to make it. So maybe in Munster, mind you. In fact, there is a bit of a line across the map. However, why was it so popular is one question, but the other question is, why did the first redactor of it, why did he decide to do it? Why did he decide to upgrade it, translate it, revise it, provide this Ptolemean schema in the cosmological seven heavens, and then insert the eschatological one? There's no doubt in my mind that he had access to the earlier versions, such as the Ptolemon, or whatever else. There might have even been some other lost. It would appear that there was another version of that eschatological seven heavens apocryphon knocking around that he had access to that is now lost. Because the differences are too great between the 18th century version and the earlier ones. However, what was his motivation? He must have been in some way taken by this apocryphon. And but the fact that the cosmological heavens, that's the thing that I never looked at before until now. As I say, I wanted to try and do something a little bit new. And this, now I'm sure John has thought about it, and you might say something, John, I don't know, but the difference between this modern recension of the cosmological heavens and that it follows the Dantean schema as per the Ptolemaic schema, that I think is interesting. And the fact that the earliest extant witness we have of modern recension dates from somewhere between 1720 and 1740, and Carlo da Quino's translation came out in 1728. I wondered, I know it's only one thing in the entire recension, it's just this one small thing, but I just wondered, had he read Carthaigh? And did that influence him when he was redacting this version and translating it and revising it and making it more relevant for his own times? And of course, if you think about it, in the 18th century, I mean, the manuscripts span the entire 18th century from the 20s on, right up to the 90s, and then we have a whole series of copies that were made in the 19th century as well. So the popularity of this recension continued right up to the end of the 19th century, and you just have to ask why. And I remember years ago, Nicole and myself gave a talk about our work, just when we were in the middle of it all and getting started on it, and the former professor of Celtic Studies here at Maria was there, and that was his question: why was it so popular? Why are there so many copies? Why was there so much interest in it? And you'd have to wonder, has it something to do with, you can imagine the 17th century Catholic homiletic tradition. But this particular text is an extraordinary text. John is the person on earth who knows most about it and knows it the best. But there's so much more in it than the classic devotional material that we're all used to. This goes well beyond that. It's rooted in the cosmos as well, and the mystery of the universe. It goes way beyond the kind of thing we find in the devotional tradition in general. So I don't know, I'm not sure. John, had you any thoughts ever about the difference between the two cosmological accounts, or the two accounts of the cosmological heavens?
Well, I guess there's a couple of factors to be taken into account. One would be that what one gets in the earlier recensions of the time of the fluid is a version of a particularly insular, and I think probably it was an Irish take of cosmological heavens. That is, which is literally non-Ptolemaic.
Right.
Because the Ptolemaic heavens have the names of pagan gods and goddesses. So it's an attempt to have a biblically based seven heavens scheme. There's lots of examples of this. Marina Smith has a very good article about it in the Okoro Festival. She calls it hybrid heavens. But the fact that there was this didn't mean that Irish thinkers weren't aware of the Ptolemaic heavens.
Yeah.
So you have both schemes also juxtaposed inside of their own. So that, it's not as if they're independent of Dante.
Oh, no, it was just really to frame it within today's discussion. I thought it was perhaps an interesting way to look at it. However, that Ptolemaic schema would have been long stayed in minds of 17th century or 18th century thinkers, and which is partly why I suppose it is interesting to find it in the later redaction. Anyway, yeah,
Thank you,
I
thank
don't know
you.
if that answers. I don't really remember what your question was.
No, that very much, thank you. Eszter, you want to come in, go.
It was very, very popular in 14th, 15th century Hungary, and we have two Latin description of two combating knights who went as vengeance or threatening vengeance to the sympathetic trajectory. One of these is the longest description of this experience, the Envisioning the Afterlife from the 1343 Carthaigh, and the other one, which was a partial failure as an experience, was made by Lieutenant of Eszter, who was the knight of the king Sigismundus, and came to St. Purgatory in 1411, but he didn't do the fast for 15 days, only for 5 days, and therefore he was there in the cavern, and finally the angel came. He told him, sorry, you don't see everything, you can speak a little into the family, but you can't see the head and however, he was very happy because obviously in Hungary.
Now, so put it out there, we have a little bit of time before coffee, so Katrina.
My question is Filippo and it's a thought. Filippo was saying about incunabulate and circulating widely in kind of 15th century context, and we're going to 16th century context. It's like for popular devotion, you mentioned merchant, my ears pricked up, and so well, there's the path of transmission, possibly for the 3rd century time with newer insertion, because we know so much about very active trade. And in the 18th century, between Ireland and the coast of France, coast of Spain, and then through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. And then also because of the penal laws, there's so many people leaving Ireland to be educated in various Irish colleges right across Europe, including Italy. And I was just thinking of all those hundreds of young men going across Italy to France, to Spain, for their training, for education, from this coming on merchant ships, and would be related to merchant, and people be down to companies, but you know, the merchant family, with both of them going over to be trained in the 18th century in various Irish colleges, and they must be picking up all that stuff. They must be kind of reading that stuff. They were in that atmosphere. And if you're looking for a possible path of transmission, for a little bit of the Canadian, or at least a concept of the Canadian, to sneak into the 3rd century of the time of Filippo, you take those incunabulae, imagine this sort of busy ports all over the place with these materials circulating popular kind of devotion and reading, and then you know how attractive the recent details are. And you can imagine someone sneaking through into somebody's suitcase on the way back to Ireland.
I suppose it occurred to me that just considering, and John has just pointed out, of course, that, which I omitted to mention, and I should have mentioned, that of course, the Irish, both medieval and modern, knew about autonomy. It's, already, it wasn't that, it was new to them. Say it didn't depend on Dante's description of Carthaigh for it. But I suppose the question I was trying to consider when preparing for today was why the redactor of the modern extension decided to alter schema as found in the cosmological schema in the term. What was his motivation? And that's when it occurred to me that you might have read Carthaigh, though be it in the vernacular or in the Latin translation. I doubt very much that they didn't put that 18th century Irish scholar didn't know much Italian, to be honest, except for the ones who went over for education. So I was wondering, was that a possible motivation of somebody inheritance? And the original redactor had read it, it's a long shot, but it's a possibility, I suppose. But yes, you have a real tangled web to be considering with your work. It's extraordinary, and your tables were. I remember the same kind of thing I worked when I couldn't get hold of it. Spirit of the right.
Regarding the out from Ireland and arriving in the next environment, it's quite. I still don't have to precise it, but I think that the original written text of Marcus was written in German, and probably it is from there that it arrived in Italy, passing from Veneto. So before in Veneto, I think, and then in Tuscany. And so it is possible that the Venetian environment translation can be previous Tuscan ones from Veneto to Tuscany. And so it is not where in the Irish monasteries that were in Italy, it is possible. We have an important Irish monastery in Bobbio that is between Tuscany and we have nine. There is one important cultural center spread with Irish legend in Navigatus and and just in Italy. So probably in this context, I don't know. Really, I don't know. The print version is taken from another already translated version in Italian. So they have a model, an Italian model already, and circulating. It's a century later from the first canon of the system in Italy. And I think that they are the printers. I think, but I cannot demonstrate it yet. But I think I have the idea. The first printer in Venice, they decided to create this new compilation of the department because they needed a new book. They thought that the Macani was a new starting of a new book, so they relay out the book and added this text that they had there. And probably they remade this ending to make it appropriate to the other lines of the collection. Then the text, this version became the Vulgate version of the Bible, and so it was really widespread in Italy because it was added in this part of the text. That's my idea, but yet I have to study more the context of redaction because the author says that the Tuscan version are the first. But instead we have coherent manuscripts, Venetian and Tuscan. And so probably invented patterns, probably can be contract.
So Ron wanted to come in there.
Thanks. Just a brief comment, kind of question before we go. Thank you for all your papers. The format of the books are rather small, aren't they? They're under 250 millimeters, which would indicate, also even Italian, that the audience was a lay kind of mercantile household readership, something that you can put in your pocket and carry around with you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or something they'd like to contribute? John?
Just, I very much liked your account of the sort of purgatory light which you get if you only fast for 5 days. But, which is just, once you go in, one just peaks it. And that was reminding me of your first slide with the 3 different types of revelation. It's probably the first of you presented without a narrative context. But I think that one does have various stories in which somehow or other the earth is peeled aside so that people can look into the afterlife. There's this early example in the Dormition of Mary, where as Mary is dying, Christ wants to show the apostles hell, and so he has the angels open up the earth and they go through it. And I think that's probably in fact what's on that Bulgarian fresco that Emma showed us, because the Dormition and the vision of hell are right next to one another. There must be other examples of that as well.
Thank you very much. Sorry, nice to you guys.
Yeah, in fact, that's supposedly the origin of Patrick's Furniture. It was originally just something that the pagan Irish would look in so that they could see the Patrick movie was talking about.
Okay, anyone else before we wrap up for coffee? Yeah, okay, so we're just going to have it. So what time is it now? We are running slightly a bit behind time, but we will give you all 10 minutes for coffee, and we will start again. Okay, 15 minutes for coffee. So we will start again at 12:10. But before we do, would you please join me in thanking our 3 speakers for a wonderful beginning.
So I have a pleasure of introducing a person who doesn't really need an introduction. And that's John Carey, whose keynote is called Whether in the Body or Out of the Body, Aspects of Visionary Experience. And briefly, John Carey is a professor of early medieval Irish here at UCC. And as you may have noticed, he has a long-standing interest in apocalyptic literature. So Emma, Carthaigh, and Katrina Doherty, he edited the 2-album collection Beyond and Beyond, Medieval Irish Eschatology, and also he's acted as a coordinating editor of Apocrypha Hiberniae, published in 3 volumes between 2009 and 2023 as part of the Corpus Christianorum series. And also he edited texts such as The Ever New Tongue, The Vision of Adamnan, and The 2 Sources of the Kingdom of Heaven. So it's my pleasure to pass the baton to John.
Thanks very much. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers of this wonderful occasion for having invited me to speak. It's marvelous to be here, and as those of us who survived the end of the world a few years ago have been reflecting, it's marvelous to have De Finibus back together again, and in this expanded and enhanced context. So the 12th chapter of St. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians begins with a passage which can be regarded as a fountainhead of Christian apocalyptic literature. He says, "It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago. Whether in the body, I cannot tell, or whether out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the 3rd heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter." Paul's tantalizing reticence provided a powerful stimulus to the imaginations of later believers. what the apostle himself forbore to reveal was allegedly disclosed in the apocryphal Vision of St. Paul, composed just a couple of centuries later. A vast proliferation of versions of the latter work then followed. It would be hard to find a medieval vision of the afterlife which does not betray its influence. This is certainly the case in Ireland, also in Italy. When Dante first recoils from Virgil's proposal that he enter hell, his words, "I am not Aeneas, I am not Paul," invoke the two cardinal texts to which the Middle Ages turned for authoritative descriptions of the underworld, the Aeneid and the Vision of St. Paul. Paul's own account in 2 Corinthians is elusive in more ways than one. He does not say in so many words that it was he who was caught up into heaven, although it has always been recognized that he was. But he is similarly and insistently mysterious regarding the nature of the experience itself, insisting twice in succession that it took place whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth. Ete insomiti et echoris tu somatos uc oida. Sive in corpore, sive extra corpus nescia. This insistence may well seem strange to us. Are not heaven, and for that matter, hell, realms of the spirit, and thus, by definition, utterly divorced from the sphere of matter, indeed, from space itself? Such a dichotomy has, over the centuries, been an essential part of the legacy of Plato, developed in a Christian context most influentially by St. Augustine. For moderns and postmoderns, it's probably rather primarily the legacy of Descartes. But there have always been other ways of thinking about these things. How far the secular dualism that we take for granted differs from the medieval understanding that would have been Dante's starting point has been well discussed by Christian Mears in his illuminating book, The Metaphysics of Dante's Comedy. St. Paul, although the distinction between the flesh and the spirit was essential to his thought and teaching, was not certain that the one could not experience the things of the other. Only God could tell. And a millennium and more later, when the knight Owen entered the regions of punishment through the cave of St. Patrick's Purgatory in Loch Durr, journeyed among the souls of the lost, beheld the entrance to the final hell, and came at last to paradise, he did all these things in his earthly body. And Dante, of course, did the same. Even when, at the beginning of the Paradiso, he is transhumanized in order to ascend into the heavens, it is in a transfigured body that he does so. And the palpability of his otherworldly travels was, we are told, taken for granted by others as well. Boccaccio relates how, when the poet was once walking through Verona, he overheard a woman say to her companions, "Ladies, do you see that man who travels to hell and returns whenever he pleases, and brings back stories about those who are there below?" And one of the others replied, "Indeed, what you say must be true. Don't you see how his beard is frizzled and his complexion dark from the heat and smoke down there?" Although Irish visions, like vision narratives in general, for the most part, differ from those of Dante and the knight Owen in being clearly out of the body. The soul itself can have a bodily or quasi-bodily aspect. While I do not think that any medieval Irish thinker would have subscribed to Tertullian's formulation, corpus est anima, some accounts do suggest that soul and body can be imagined as being respectively the attenuated and the dense versions of some all-inclusive substance. In one Middle Irish anecdote, two clerical students make a pact that whichever of them dies first will return to tell the other about the afterworld. When one of them does die, however, the other waits in vain for him to come back. But then he too succumbs to an accident and suddenly sees the soul of his friend approaching. "Ill is your word," he says, "and it has been long until you came." "Do not rebuke me unfairly," says the other, "for I came many times, so that I was at your pillow speaking with you, and you did not hear me. And the heavy, thick body does not hear the subtle, airy, tenuous soul speaking to it." Even more suggestive along these lines is the story of a warrior named Carey. He and his companions suddenly and inexplicably find that their souls have left their bodies. In the words of the tale, they saw that they were naked, without clothes upon them. Then they saw their own bodies before them, and that astonished them. After they had looked at one another, they did not know what they should do. This is what they decided: to leave their bodies there and go to where their wives were, to find out whether they were in their bodies or whether they were only spirits. They went then in the bright day to their wives, and they sat on the dais of the house, and their wives did not notice, although they were talking to them for a long time. They did not hear them. "Fetch us food to consume," said Carey, "for if our bodies are around us, we will consume something, and if they are not, we will not, and there will be no diminution on what we will consume of it." They fetched food for themselves then, and no one in the house saw that they fetched it. And there was no diminution upon it, but only the marks of their mouths. And they were not seen wherever they went, and the objects around them did not hinder them wherever they wished to go. That such discarnate souls should be imperceptible and able to pass through solid objects will not surprise us. More unexpected is the extent to which they can continue to interact with their physical surroundings, however feebly. Even if they cannot consume the food, they leave the marks of their mouths upon it. It is a recurrent feature of such accounts that the soul, although it has left its body, continues to experience itself as a corporeal entity, and at first may not even be aware of its new condition. In the story of the two clerical students, the second to die does not recognize his own corpse. We're told, "The soul saw the dead body before it, and the soul thought that it was still in the body, and that this was someone else's body. That is bad," said he, "that the folk of the church have brought a dead person to me." What is this out-of-body counterpart of the body of flesh? It's reminiscent of the Neoplatonic doctrine of the ochema, or vehicle of the soul. This, however, was generally said to be spherical rather than anthropomorphic. The concept of the ochema presumably lies behind the vision of the departing soul as a fiery globe in the dialogues of Gregory the Great, an image echoed in Adornon's Life of St. Columba, and also in the statement in the Old Irish cosmological treatise in Tengavith Nua that souls are seen to be round when departing from their bodies. Angels, and by extension, demons, are also spiritual beings like souls. But they too can be portrayed as having bodies in some Irish sources. Thus, a set of theological propositions in one 9th century Irish manuscript includes the assertion that since the beginning, angels have ethereal, sensible bodies. Such a statement is rather startling. Precisely this idea was rejected as contrary to the truth of the Catholic faith by the contemporary theologian Hincmar of Reims, and the same condemnation has been reaffirmed in catechisms down to our own time. On the other hand, St. Augustine proposed in some of his writings that the bodies in which angels have been manifest to humans are real, not only apparent, and that demons dwelling in the turbulent lower air have bodies made of that air, while unfallen angels inhabit the upper atmosphere and have celestial bodies, coelestia corpora. Writing around the year 700, Alderman attributes to St. Columba the exclamation, "How wonderful and without compare is the fineness of an angel's nature. Look, how an angel of the Lord has been here inside the church, watching and blessing us, and has gone out through the roof of the church, leaving no trace of his passing." Although not the only possible interpretation, these words give the impression that the fineness or subtilitas of the angel's nature is that of a highly refined substance to which earthly matter is permeable. The mid-7th century theologian known as the Irish Augustine took this line of thinking even further, proposing that the Holy Spirit itself had assumed a body of air, and it appeared in the form of a dove at Christ's baptism. The doctrine that demons have or can assume bodies of air, found not only in the writings of St. Augustine, but also in those of Isidore, is present in Irish sources from an early date. It appears in the 7th century Liber de Ordine Creaturorum, in the treatise on predestination by the 9th century theologian Eriugena, and in vernacular texts, speculating on the nature of the Tuatha De Danann, the supernatural inhabitants of the Shiva, or hollow hills of Ireland. And if angelic spirits, fallen or unfallen, could assume such bodies, might not human souls do likewise? One unequivocal affirmation of such a possibility occurs in the late medieval tale Carthaigh, in which an otherworld woman tells the protagonist that when he dies, she will give him a light aerial body in which he will exist until the day of judgment. Similarly, in the Irish version of the eschatological text, the dialogue of the body and the soul, the garment of the soul, white for the virtuous, black for sinners, is said to be made of stormy air. Not that the idea is peculiar to Ireland. Thus, the Frankish monk Barontus, during an out-of-body experience supposed to have taken place in the late 7th century, wore a body taken from air and light. That souls may have some kind of bodily being, even outside their fleshly bodies, might also seem to be indicated by apparitions of the dead. What is it that is seen on such occasions? One answer would be such an airy body, as I have been speaking of. Another might be that there's nothing physical there at all, that the apparition is due only to the manipulation of our senses. This may be what the Irish Augustine means when he says it was not the prophet Samuel who appeared to King Saul, but only a phantasma, if by that term he means an imaginary appearance. Particularly curious, and evidently antedating Christianity, is the notion that the soul can leave the body in the form of another creature. When the soul of Barontus first comes out of his mouth, it does so in the likeness of a small bird. And souls frequently appear as birds in Irish and other sources. In his History of the Lombards, Paul the Deacon relates an anecdote in which what seems to be the soul of King Gontran emerges from his mouth as a small lizard as he is sleeping. And similar stories are found as far afield as the Caucasus. Even more dramatic are accounts of certain men in Ireland who, in a state of sleep or trance, leave their bodies in the shape of wolves. These wolves are physical entities which ravage the surrounding countryside. St. Augustine was clearly aware of similar stories, which he explains in his own way. He says, "I cannot believe that even the body, much less the mind, can really be changed into bestial forms and lineaments by any reason, art, or power of the demons. But the fantasticum of a man, which even in thought or dreams goes through innumerable changes, may, when the man's senses are laid asleep or overpowered, be presented to the senses of others in a corporeal form, in some indescribable way unknown to me, so that men's bodies themselves may lie somewhere, alive indeed, yet with their senses locked up much more heavily and firmly than by sleep, while that fantasticum, as it were embodied in the shape of some animal, may appear to the senses of others, and may even seem to the man himself to be changed." The word fantasticum appears nowhere else in Latin as a noun, so far as I am aware. Augustine has borrowed it from the Greek fantastikon, used to designate the image-forming capacity of the soul, or, by the Stoic philosopher Chrysippus, for the soul's susceptibility to mental images that lack a basis in sensory experience. Augustine employs fantasticum in a sense which is related to these, but distinct. For him, it is the self that is experienced by the dreamer, a self different not only from the body, but also from the soul. This is a fascinating concept, but one which does not seem to have had any echoes in Ireland. Whether embodied or disembodied, the souls in the stories to which I've been referring so far have an autonomous power of motion. Already in the vision of St. Paul, a guiding angel commands Paul to follow him into the regions of the blessed and the lost, and Paul actively obeys. Strikingly, this is not the case in the earliest Irish vision narratives that have come down to us. In the account of the vision of Fursa, written late in the 7th century or early in the 8th, Fursa is said to have had 2 visions, each preceded by an attack of acute physical debility. On both occasions, his sight darkened and he lost the ability to move his limbs, then lost consciousness, and was at length taken to have died by those who were tending him. From his own perspective, the darkness that had surrounded him was lightened by the radiance of angels, who now came to guard and guide him. He himself was entirely passive, however. While one of the angels protected him against the attacks of demons, 2 more conveyed his soul to the heavens. In the course of the first vision, it was not until he was told that he must return to it that Fursa realized that he had left his body. On both occasions, as is often the case with near-death experiences, he was acutely reluctant to resume a corporeal existence. This lack of capacity for any kind of physical or quasi-physical action suggests that Forza in his vision was entirely disembodied. Even in such a condition, though, there is no radical Cartesian split between soul and body. At one point in his visionary journey, Forza is burned when a damned soul is hurled against him by a demon, and the mark of the burn is found on his body after he wakes. In a wondrous manner, the author comments, what the soul alone had experienced was made manifest in the flesh. There's something similar in Adolf's approximately contemporary life of St. Columba. Here, an angel, which has appeared to Columba one night in a trance or ecstasis of the mind, strikes him in the vision with a whip, the scar from which, Adolf tells us, remained with him for the rest of his life. The narrative of Forza's vision was written in Latin. The vision of Laszrein, composed roughly a century later, is our oldest vision text written in the Irish language. It has unfortunately survived only as a fragment, but even this portion is richly suggestive. After describing how Laszrein had fasted for 9 days in an abandoned church, the story continues. Sleep overcame him in the oratory. In his sleep, he heard a voice addressing him, "Arise." He did not move the first time. He heard the voice again. Thereupon, he raised his head and made the sign of the cross upon his face. He saw that the church in which he was bright, and a portion of the night still remained. And he saw a radiant shape between the chancel rail and the altar. The shape said to him, "Come to me." The cleric's whole body trembled from crown to sole at that voice. He suddenly saw that his soul was above the crown of his head, and he did not know by what way it had gone out of the body. He saw that the church was open up to heaven. He saw the 2 angels took him between them and raised him into the air. This passage vividly conveys a sense of what it must be like to find oneself suddenly, without having had the chance to prepare oneself, outside the whole of one's accustomed reality. I can never read it without a shiver. I hope that some of you may have felt this too. What remains of the account, 1 angel commands and 2 others transport Lashrein's soul. The same arrangement that we've seen in the story of Forza's visions, by which the vision of Laszrein was evidently influenced in other ways as well. Even more important than the mode in which one experiences one's own person in a vision narrative is the nature of the faculty of vision itself. Here too, the account of Forza offers fascinating details. As we have seen, all becomes dark as he loses consciousness of his mortal surroundings. When he again sees light in the first of his visions, it is the light of angels. He finds it dazzling. He saw the faces of all the angels with equal likeness, although on account of the wondrous brightness of the light, he was not able to see the form of their bodies clearly. In the second vision, which is related at greater length, the same angels come to him again. When they carry him aloft, he sees nothing of roof or house, but is confronted by a throng of demons from whom the angels rescue him. In the words of the text, then the holy angel who was on his right said, "Look at the world." The holy man looked, and he saw a dark valley beneath him, far below. And he saw 4 fires in that place, in the air, some distance away from him. And the holy angel again asked, "What are these 4 fires?" The man of God responded that he did not know. The holy angel said to him, "These are the 4 fires which engulf the world. The one is the fire of falsehood, the second is cupidity, the third is dissent, the fourth is impiety." Then indeed the fires grew. They were made into one huge fire, which approached him. And the man of God, fearing the threatening fire, said to the holy angel who was speaking with him, "The fire is approaching me." The angel replied to him, "That which you have not kindled shall not burn you. For to the extent that the body is set on fire by illicit thought, to that extent shall the soul burn in deserved punishment." Then he saw the holy angel go before and divide the flames of the fire into 2 walls on either side. And the 2 angels protected him on each side from the fire. Carthaigh is then carried further into the heavenly regions. On his return, he again passes through the fire, which, as we've seen, does indeed burn him at that point, on account of his unintended complicity in wrongdoing. This threatening description is based on a corresponding passage in the vision of St. Paul. Instructed by his guiding angel to look back upon the world from below, Paul finds that it is as nothing in my sight. Then he sees a great cloud of fire spread out over the whole world, and is told that this is injustice stirred up by the princes of sinners. In the first of his 2 visions, it is not until he is told that he must return to it that Carthaigh realizes that he had left his body. When the first vision ends, it is stated that Carthaigh, and I quote, "could not understand how the soul had entered the body." At the conclusion of the second, looking down from the roof of the house, he saw that his body opened in the chest, presumably so that the soul could re-enter it. What does Carthaigh see, and what does he not see? He sees angels and demons and human souls, and the light in which he sees is a radiance shed by the angels themselves. He sees human wickedness in the form of fire, a fire which can burn the spiritual counterpart of his body. But he does not see the house in which he is lying, or his friends and relatives standing around his bed. The only physical object that appears to be visible to him is his own body. We are, in other words, confronted with a state of awareness radically different from our own. While the eyes of the flesh can see matter, but not spirit, the eyes of the soul can see spirit, but barely any matter at all. This conception is further developed in the account of the vision of Laszrein. When Laszrein opens his eyes, as we've heard, he saw that the church in which he was bright, and a portion of the night still remained. He saw that the church was open up to heaven. In other words, the light by which Laszrein can now see is not the light of this world, and the roof of the church in which he is lying has become transparent. Like Carthaigh, Laszrein is accosted by a crowd of accusing demons whom he is delivered by his angel companions. He then embarks on a grim journey. Then the angel from the great host said to the two angels who were about him, "Take this man so that he may see hell." Then he is allowed to go northward along a great valley. It seemed to him that he could see as far as though it were from the rising of the sun to its setting. They saw a great pit, as it were the mouth of a cave, ahead of them between the mountains. They go a long way into the cave until they reached a great, lofty, black mountain before them at the mouth of hell. And there was a great valley on top of that mountain. That then is the doorway of hell, and the cave is its porch. And he saw the people of the island, all who were under God's displeasure while in the body. They were in the middle of the valley, lamenting. Eszter, who seems to recognize many friends and acquaintances in this throng, is understandably distressed. "Alas, God," said the soul, "has a plague come after us? For all these multitudes were alive when we left them behind us." "Not that," said the angel, "but everyone whom you left behind alive, who is under God's displeasure, it is that which their souls see ahead, which is the end which awaits them if they do not repent." This is a mind-bending speech. Eszter had thought that he was in the afterworld, gazing upon the dead, but in fact, he is still in this world, and these are the living. Seen with the eyes of the spirit, this present world is believed to be the porch, the antechamber of hell. Eszter's sight, like Forsa's, is now open to immaterial realities, but confused by the transition from one state of being to another. He is at first not able to recognize this. There are further Irish vision narratives. Of those in the Irish language, the most notable is the Vision of Avignon, composed around the end of the first millennium. This is a remarkable piece of literature, in which the framework furnished by the Vision of St. Paul serves as a basis for a vivid, richly detailed panorama of the realms of reward and punishment. But it has little to contribute to an inquiry into the nature of visionary experience. We are given no insight into the thoughts and feelings of Avignon himself, the purported visionary. He serves as a mere cipher, a pretext for the series of gorgeous and gruesome descriptions that dominate the text. For a saint, such vision, as is attributed to Forsa and Eszter when they are out of their bodies, can be experienced already in the flesh. Gregory the Great, the fourth book of whose dialogues was a major source for medieval thinking concerning the afterlife, spoke of the ability to see souls as follows. A little before, you complained that you could not see the soul of one when it departed out of his body. But that was your fault, who desired with corporeal eyes to behold an invisible thing. For many of us, who by sincere faith and plentiful prayer have had the eye of the mind purified, have often seen souls going out of their bodies. And therefore now I think it necessary to set down both how and in what sort men's souls departing out of their bodies have been seen, and also what wonderful things have been revealed to them at the time of their departure, that by this means examples may satisfy our wavering and doubtful minds, which reason, cannot so fully persuade. As Katja Ritari, among others, has noted, this passage, with its account of the power of the eye of the mind, the mentis oculus, had a powerful influence on Adorno's portrayal of Saint Columba. Adorno's Vita Sancti Columbae is divided into 3 books, each assigned to a different category of miracle. The 3rd book, of Angelic Visitations in Heavenly Light, is of obvious relevance to our topic. But the first 2 books as well, dealing with miracles of prophecy and of power, include stories of extraordinary knowledge and awareness. So far as I can see, there is not much in all of this to which analogies can be found in Dante, who, after all, made it clear to his readers that he was not a saint. But there is one notable comparison that we'll come back to presently. There are several anecdotes in which Columba sees angels who are invisible to his companions. On one occasion, for instance, clairvoyantly aware that a man is falling from the roof of a high building in a distant monastery, the saint calls upon an angel whom he sees standing immediately in front of him, between 2 of his own monks, to go to the man's assistance. Again, toward the end of his life, Columba sees angels who have been sent to carry his soul to heaven, standing on a rock on the other side of the sun from Iona. Adorno also describes how Columba saw angels carrying the souls of those who had just died to their reward, or fighting in the air against demons to protect the newly departed. The eye of his mind, then, can perceive not only souls, but also angels and demons. Thus, Columba can see how the soul of a man's wife comes together with the angels at his dying to fight on her husband's behalf, and how the souls of monks drowned in Belfast Lough fight valiantly against the demons who come to attack them, receiving support presently from angelic reinforcements. Especially dramatic is one story, in which Columba sees a troop of devils who are preparing to attack his community with plague. Adorno says, though he was alone against such an army of countless opponents, he was protected by the armor of St. Paul. In other words, the spiritual armor which Paul speaks in his epistle to the Ephesians, and flung himself into a great conflict. The battle continued most of the day, and the hosts were unable to vanquish him, while he could not drive them away from Iona on his own. Then the angels of God came to his aid, as he afterwards told a few of the brethren, and the devils were terrified of them and left the place. Here again, we're confronted with the question whether what is described is an experience in the body or out of the body. As all of the other combats of this nature described by Adorno are fought out of the body, that is presumably the case here as well. We are to imagine Columba's body as lying dormant accordingly, while his soul contends with demons in the air. It's an image curiously reminiscent of the experiences of the peasant visionaries known as Benandanti in the Friuli region of Italy in the 16th and 17th centuries, documented by Carlo Ginzburg in his book, The Night Battles. The Benandanti believed that their souls left their bodies to engage in combat with witches who sought to bring harm to their crops and villages. As Ginzburg further pointed out, there are striking similarities between these ideas and Baltic beliefs concerning werewolves, and the Irish werewolf beliefs that I was discussing earlier clearly belong here as well. there's at least the possibility then that indigenous conceptions of the supernatural are one of the elements lying behind Adovnon's account. With Columba's confrontation with demons can be compared a brief anecdote about Saint Brendan. We're told, Brendan went to bring the soul of his mother from hell. His soul was battling against demons for 1 hour until the same time the next day, until he fetched his mother from the demons. And the bishop Moynihan was keeping his body in the meantime. Then his soul came to his body, and he heaved a sigh. Moynihan asks Brendan what he has seen on the other side, and Brendan replies with an elusive and menacing description, concluding, "I fear death." Here, the soul clearly leaves the body. Not only does it fight against demons, as Columba does, but it goes to hell to do so. Also interesting is the circumstance that a companion watches over Brendan's body while his soul is absent. The same is said of the Irish werewolves and of the clairvoyant sleep, which is said to be the culmination of the Irish mantic ritual known as Imbus Forosnim, the great knowledge which illuminates. While Adovnon's primary purpose is, of course, the glorification of Columba, so that it is Columba's visionary abilities which are given the most attention, it's clear that other holy individuals as well can see spiritual realities that are invisible to the rest of humanity. We are told how, even in a gathering of saints, it is only Saint Brendan of Clonfert who was able to see a radiant ball of fire shining over Columba's head as he celebrated Mass. How the aged teacher Winiard was able to see an angel walking beside Columba, unseen by others. And how St. Brendan of Birr, at a great assembly of ecclesiastics, was alone in seeing a great pillar of fire rising from Columba's head, and angels accompanying him. In addition, we are given one account of how it was once granted not to a great saint, but to a disobedient monk, to see Columba in the distance, conversing with a company of angels. But this is clearly to be regarded as an exception. As Adovnon himself says, this cannot have happened, I think, without the permission of God, who desired that the reputation and glory of St. Columba, notwithstanding his own reluctance, to be made more widely known among the peoples, because there had been a witness to this vision. The power of Columba's eye of the mind is manifested in other ways as well. He is said to have been able to see what was behind him. Adovnon says, what he could not see behind with his bodily eyes, he saw with spiritual ones. And he had not merely knowledge, but often actual sight of things happening far off. When St. Carthaigh, far away in Ireland, ran to his church to pray, Columba saw him doing so in the spirit, while Carthaigh, for his part, heard what Columba was saying with the inward ear of the heart. At one point, such perception at a distance becomes so total as almost to amount to bilocation. When Cormac Luleathon and his companions are menaced by monsters in the Northern Ocean, Adovnon tells us that our own St. Columba was present in spirit in the boat with Cormac, though his body was far away. The supernatural vision which Columba has attained can accordingly not only perceive spiritual beings, but also the things of this world. But it does so in a fashion that is unfettered by space, or, in the case of prophecy, by time. I'll come back to these characteristics towards the conclusion. Another aspect of vision, as we've seen, is supernatural light. The light by which Fórsa and Lasrian see when they have left their bodies. This too can be seen by saints in this life. As Gregory states in his Moralia in Io, by some, while still living in this corruptible flesh, yet growing in incalculable power by a certain piercingness of contemplation, the eternal brightness of God is able to be seen. This heavenly brilliance is conspicuous in Adorno's Vita Sancti Columbae. At times, it's associated with the visits of angels, at times, more generally, with the heavenly realm. On one notable occasion, it is directly linked with the Holy Spirit itself. When, as Adorno says, the grace of the Holy Spirit was poured upon Columba, he remained day and night locked in his house, which was filled with heavenly light. No one was allowed to go near him, and he neither ate nor drank. But from the house, rays of brilliant light could be seen at night, escaping through the chinks of the doors and through the keyholes. This light is also a light of the understanding. He was able to see openly revealed many secrets that had been hidden since the world began, while all that was most dark and difficult in the sacred scriptures lay open, plain, and clearer than light in the sight of his most pure heart. At various times and places, theologians have debated whether the radiance of heaven is actually the uncreated light of God himself. This was, for instance, an important part of the Palamite controversy in the Greek church in the 14th century. The Irish Augustine, for one, had no doubt that humans can experience the uncreated light. He wrote of Christ's transfiguration that the Lord's face shone with the splendor of the sun. But it was not the flesh itself that shone, but the divinity hiding in the body granted a tiny aperture for beholding its light to those who were gazing outside, to the extent that they were capable of it. It will be evident that the heavenly light described by Adorno differs from that which we have encountered in other sources, in that it is visible to ordinary folk. It is also evident that it is not intended for them. None are allowed to enter the house in which Columba is bathed in the radiance of the Holy Spirit. The latter point is further brought out in a sequence of brief chapters. In the first of these, the monk Ferghne, praying in a side chapel, involuntarily sees golden light from the utmost height of heaven, shining around the edges of a partly closed door, from where Columba is praying elsewhere in the church. Adorno says, in the same way that no one is able to look directly at the sun at midday in summer without being dazzled, so Ferghne could not bear that heavenly brightness, for it was brighter than any light and completely dazzled his sight. Its radiance filled him with fear, so that his strength failed him utterly. When Colgu, going to the church at night, saw it suddenly filled with heavenly light, instantaneously, as if it were lightning, and then it was gone. Columba warned him afterward that such sights were not intended for him. And when Bergson actually attempted, out of curiosity, to spy on the saint, peering through his keyhole, he could not endure the brightness that he saw within and fled. Rebuking him subsequently, Columba said that, if I had not in that instant prayed for your sake, you would have dropped dead by the door, or else your eyes would have been torn from their sockets. The revelations that are granted as grace to the saints can then be things of terror and destruction for lesser folk. In Inteme Vithnua, similarly, when a heavenly tree covered with angelic birds is suddenly revealed to an unbeliever, we are told that his sinful eyes could not endure gazing on the holy colors. His eyes burst in his head. Then the blast of a fiery wind assailed him, driving into his chest and face, so that they became as black as a beetle. And it cast him down half dead in the midst of the encampment. And he said, "Harsh are the torments which await me and are in store for me. Hauntingly beautiful is the bright plain which we have seen." A few moments later, he's dead. But let us return to more rarefied forms of perception and to one more look at Dante. Dante speaks of heightened capacities of awareness at the beginning of the Paradiso and at its end. In the first canto, still in the earthly paradise, he tells us that I fixed my eyes on the sun beyond our wont. Much is granted to our faculties there that is not granted here, by virtue of the place made for humankind as its proper abode. In Eden, then, it is possible to look directly at the sun. This is an enhancement of physical sight, but no more than that. What Dante experiences in the final canto, by contrast, is something ultimately unimaginable. Looking aloft toward God, I believe that because of the keenness of the living ray which I endured, I should have been lost if my eyes had been turned from it. I remember that on this account, I was the bolder to sustain it until I united my gaze with the infinite goodness. O abounding grace, whereby I presumed to fix my look through the eternal light, so that all my sight was spent therein. In its depth I saw ingathered, bound by love in one single volume, that which is dispersed in leaves throughout the universe, substances and accidents and their relations, as though fused together in such a way that what I tell is but a simple light. The universal form of this knot I believe that I saw, because in telling this, I feel my joy increase. These words, and especially the image of a way of seeing, which gathers all things in un volume, recall a speech which Adorno places in the mouth of Columba, an unacknowledged borrowing from words attributed to Saint Benedict by Gregory the Great. There are some people, few indeed, to whom the grace of God has given the power to see brightly and most clearly, with a mental grasp miraculously enlarged, at one and the same time, as if lit by a single sunbeam, even the entire orbit of the whole earth, with the sea and sky around it. A mode of vision, all penetrating and all comprehending, taking in all of time and space, apprehending both the things of matter and the things of spirit. To see like this, we become as close as any creature can to seeing as God sees. It's time to conclude. We've considered a range of sources and phenomena, but we would, of course, could, of course, have considered much more. And each of the topics on which I've touched could have been explored in greater depth. Some aspects of what we have seen in Ireland can be compared with what we find in Dante, but there are also numerous and critical differences. Ultimately, however, the Irish texts and the Commedia are concerned with the same realities. Reflecting upon the cluster of subjects to which this study day is devoted, I find myself reminded that Fili, the Irish term for an elite scholar poet, originally meant simply one who sees. As scholar, as poet, and as visionary, Dante is the great Italian Fili. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And please sign with any questions. If anyone has first question. Otherwise, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's a wonderful lecture. While you were talking of this aerial body, of course, I was thinking of Dante's theory on the aerial body and possible precursors as Verontus, the body of air, and all this topic, which I think should be probably studied even more. But I was curious about, I wanted to ask you some thoughts about demons, like the devil's body. Because I remember a passage from St. Augustine where he mentions his aerial body, even for the demons that have the ability to move very quickly and free, and they can also, as you were mentioning, have like being able to do some prophecies because they can see more in the future, which is something that it looks, I don't know, a bit controversial, maybe considering that the eternal dimension and the sight of God is in the eternal dimension, and like if they would take part of this.
If I'm thinking of the same passage that you're referring to, I don't think that he quite says that they can see into the future. He says that they're very good guessers because they know a lot more than we do, so that they have a much better sense of what's likely to happen.
Yeah, and it's their body actually, their very light body, like that allows them to see more in the future. And actually, I was thinking of the damned souls in Inferno, which are able to give some prophecies to Dante. And this is another controversial trait, as it looks like if they are able to see in the future as the blessed, and for of course, the mediation of God. And so, yeah, I was wondering if in many visionary texts, maybe there was something similar of damned people that were able to see the future as well, like having this prophecy, like prophetic powers, or.
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not able to think of any instances of that. Other colleagues in the room may be able to. Note there are various accounts of people conversing with the dead, but in the case of straightforwardly ecclesiastical texts, I suppose one could say, I don't think that prophecy is involved. The one exception, not an ecclesiastical text, that occurs to me is the remarkable text edited by Kevin, at the back of the room, Ballion Style and the Ecstasy of the Phantom, in which an early Irish king finds himself in the presence of a being who identifies himself in a whole series of mutually contradictory ways, but at least one of them would seem to suggest that he's dead. And he then describes all the kings who are going to live in Ireland, reign in Ireland until the end of the world. But the whole framework of that is doesn't really seem to be coming from St. Augustine. But that's the best example that I can think of.
Thank you so much.
And I was wondering if the Irish dialogue of the body and the soul you mentioned with the black bodies of the dam and the white bodies of the redeemed can be source for the visual book killing, which is the vision of Turkilus, who was a peasant of the area of Essex, and who had the vision in 1206, because he sees in his vision black bodies of the soul and white bodies of the soul, but also bodies with stains and black bodies who have white stain as representing the moonbeams, and white bodies with black stains who were basically good, but with the few sins. I don't know if this dialogue was spread or translated in English.
Well, the vision of the body, sorry, the dialogue of the body and the soul didn't originate in Ireland. We have an Irish version of it, but there are many, many other versions, many Latin versions. And just to do a quick advert for the book The End and Beyond, there's a sort of an exhaustive account of the textual tradition of the earlier dialogue of the body and soul by Charles Wright in that. What's I think distinctive about the Irish version, that's the reason that I quoted it, was that it suggests that the garment of the soul is made out of air. But the notion of the black and white garments, that goes further back, and that might well be the source that the vision of Thorkel is drawing on.
Thank you. Questions? That's how kind of the GM comments. Basically, just reopening names, not really questions, but so you're free to respond in whichever way you wish. So just begin from the beginning with the title, Sets and Falls model. I think the same when you think some fall, model of Dante, how very commentators of Dante try to make fall structure sound more like Dante's. So they will say things again and again, for example, who says that house of hospitals for so just to make sure that it's very clear that actually, Dante is not like St. Paul, but also like St. Paul, and Bookworm gets raptured corporeally. So since that in the commentary tradition, trying to draw that for them to be and also the Boccaccio example, I read this kind of anecdotes, read it again in various contexts. The more I read it, the more fascinating and interesting I find it. So it's the idea of having the visible sense, how to relate to the afterlife. And the way that Boccaccio frames it, he's also saying this is a popular reception of Dante. Inferno specifically saying, at this point, Inferno is already being read, it's being kind of recognized by people as visually text, and he's also saying these women that are recognizing it as part of this traditional visions of like physical body departure. This is possible divisions of types of experiences. What I find interesting about the comments that the casual reports or events is that Robin say he thought of one of the actions and that when he's allowed to, when he comes to our time to come, he's just at his own will becomes a good pieces. Another thing that we say is that Dante can avere suono, so it's implied that he goes there multiple times, he makes multiple journeys, and always gets this constantly updated version of the afterlife, the news of the afterlife, which I find is an interesting way of looking at a company. I mean, it's not how it's presented in the text necessarily, but that's how at least some people, according to Boccaccio, seem to perceive it.
Yes, I suppose one can't perhaps completely exonerate Boccaccio from looking down a bit on these ladies. But because I think he then goes on to say, well, Dante overheard this and then walked on with a little smile. But their view of things is portrayed as being a naive one.
Makes a good idea. I guess pure faith, but also, yeah, they just be yeah, and talking about this somatic appearances, and someone just pointed out to me that presenting himself appears as like kind of ghosts to various people, and that's how the comedy is complete. It's again a principle actual. We didn't have a whole comedy of this appearance in the dream, but no one really appears to Dante as a phantasm or ghost in his own writing. So I don't know what that means, but it's just interesting kind of thing to know that. Of course, he's aware of this whole tradition of what people are very to, but reporting people are very to other people in dreams, but never can describe that kind of experience. Somewhat appear to him.
Well, I guess he has some extraordinarily vivid dreams in the Vita Nova.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's not quite a sense of a quite figure. It was kind of fun and you got a figure of a moment. Sort of views and I think it's general. Or figure out a specific real person. And I feel like it's a general comment question for the people that people in the room. Again, to come back to this sort of notion of the shadow or the real bodies, rather that this has been considering to talk about it a bit more. Because in many situations, it's particularly this great, unique invention of Dante's. I guess in many ways it is, but as John just pointed out, and a lot of people are thinking about these issues, I guess the words way before Dante, even though Dante takes 10 years and it's created on context. But I was curious about the fact that if you think that Dante thinks about what happens to the soul of departure, so that's something that John was talking about, these elements, round shaped things that departs, or is it? I think that tells us a little bit in poetry environments, the notion of aerial bodies in general, information about pieces, and kind of reformation on what the soul does, rather than the absolute aerial bodies. Isn't quite give us as much detail as what happens at the exact moment of departure, I guess. So maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just curious. Relationship with what John was talking about that is aerial bodies.
Yeah, I think there is a jump basically from the moment where the soul like detaches from the body and the moment where it's at the riverbank of the Etna or the tidal. And so there is no description of this kind of moment of passage, but there is the moment when the soul of Monfonte, like there's the topical like scene of the angel fighting against a devil for the possession of the soul at the moment of his death. But then the scene like ends up like there. Just St. Francis comes to take him. Like there are two different moments where the thing is a bit more described as fighting between a good and an evil part. But then the actual like passage into the afterlife, I think, is never clearly described. I mean, visions where we have sometimes direction that the angel and the soul take to ride in the other world. I think, yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there. Thanks a million, Tom. That's really, really fascinating. So I suppose you really with that Eastern we can't expect this a lot. One thing we do get when we read that is this, how much of the media is centered on the fact that this Dante character, who undergoes this journey, is bad from the bottom.
and starts off like from country law, and it is interesting we're talking about light and sea life, you know, how you see light. That right from until he gets out of the world and tries to climb the hill, and he sees the light, that he's not in a position to see that light, to understand that light. Full process, full journey. So the environment is really about the shock of something, and it comes to the sense of everything. And then there's the headings of the dog, where he casts a shadow, he is tired, he has to sleep physically, he's wrecked, you know, he's doing the body is central, but also that I don't know about more general kind of literature, which kind of extols, you know, the spirit above the body is something that is heavily burdens. Dante celebrates the body in a way that I don't think that to understand. And also this idea that the body will be returned to you in the day of judgment, that those in hell will receive back their bodies, and so their torments will increase manifold, except the suicide bodies will be hanging on branches of the trees soon. But equally, in paradise, you will be reunited with your best self whenever you listen, you realize with your best bodily self, and so you can enjoy and share in bliss of the attitude body, and that husbands and wives can actually see each other again and see their children, and so I personally believe that the body and the image of the body is central. Is the kind of one of the key concepts to that is the whole idea that what this comes about. And the very fact that when he does, when he is accorded a vision of the God at the end of the comedy, this moment of revelation, it is must refute our image. And he leaves that that whole poem making me want more. The whole language of Palladino, which is possibly the difficult part to write about, is done through bodily terms. It is done all of the imagery and goes back to basically kind of tradition, but it is all done thirsting for knowledge, hungering for knowledge. And once you are sated, talking about the mental softness, once you are sated enough, you thirst more, you hunger ever more. So there's this complete repentance, then it allows you to go further into it, to the extent that it ends up being that it sees these visions as a river of light through the eyes. So everything, I think, that I'm really delighted what we're talking about today, everything hinges on the body.
Well, thank you. That puts it all, I think, extraordinarily well. And as a non-Dantist, feeling very, very privileged to be here. My two very, very amateurish reactions to that would be one to say, I think almost everything that you say, for instance, about describing the nature of the resurrection body and what human experience will be like after the resurrection, can be found in the tradition as a whole. What makes it different in the Commedia is just that Dante is able to imagine things with this almost superhuman vividness. So they become real for us in a way that they don't necessarily, a theologian is speculating about what this would be. And also when you talk about Dante's experience of his corporality in the corporeality on the mountain and so on, I would situate that again in the sort of the wider context of his extraordinary vividness. The fact that, as you all know far better than I, at every point in the Commedia, we know sort of exactly what time it is because he tells us exactly what all of the constellations are. So every aspect of the physicality of the universe is vividly present to his mind at every point, and so his body naturally also. But I guess at the heart of all of that would simply be that in taking the body seriously, Dante is just being a Christian. And he's just, of course, expressing it incomparably better than almost any other Christian could.
Ask a question. Or maybe we're just hungry. I suppose we can take a break for lunch, and then we will see each other again. Check. It's 2:45. Yeah. 25%.
Yes, I think they have to.
It's fine. Thank you so much again.
Just to say that there is lunch over for students, Chair, and we hope that lunch won't be like Dunderland's lunch, dinner in court, where you know, I can kill them, food isn't that bad.